Okay, we're live. We should be
Excellent.
live on Odyssey. We should be live on Rumble.
Rumble.
And we should be live on Locals. And we should be live on YouTube. So, I
Gosh.
mean, everyone, if you can see me, if you can hear me on all those different platforms,
Mm-hmm.
let me know, because we are broadcasting from a lot of different places. And
Mm.
we are back broadcasting on YouTube. And let's hope that
Yeah.
everything goes all right on YouTube.
Yeah.
Just let me know in the chat. Just put a one if you can hear me and see me on all those different platforms.
Mm.
Just let me know.
Mm.
1 second. How are you doing, Alexander? Just let me know in
Very,
the chats, everybody, with the one, if you can see me or hear me.
very, very tired, but obviously, absolutely fine in all other respects. I mean, that's I think the important thing to say. We are well. Very, very busy trying to stay on top of events, but which I think we're managing to do. Even though, just to reiterate to everybody, there's just two of us, Alex and me. We're not supermen, but we still manage.
Okay. YouTube's fine. Rumble's fine.
Mm.
Locals is fine. Can Odyssey, people in the chat in Odyssey, can you see it? If there's anyone in the Odyssey chat that can just put a one, just let me know that you can see everything.
Yeah.
And I think I see it. Okay. Okay, so I think Odyssey's all right as well.
Well done, Alex.
I hope. Working here. All right. Thank you, RV Life. Andrew, thank you. Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right, let's begin. We had the Lavrov press conference just now that wrapped up with Western mainstream media, and as expected, they gave him the usual talking points.
Yeah.
And Lavrov answered, in a stoic way, which is the title of this live stream, emotion versus stoicism.
Yes.
And I think you can definitely see the emotion you saw the emotion of the press and the media, and versus the stoicism of Lavrov. And there's no doubt that he's been very stoic. The Russian government has been very stoic and very quiet. They haven't really been saying much. They have not retaliated in an emotional way.
No.
And on the Western side, I think you've seen the sanctions that have been just, an avalanche of sanctions from economic to even cats. They're even sanctioning Russian cats from competing in competition. I mean, it's just gotten off the charts. Companies,
Absolutely.
Corporations, Apple, Google, censorship, you name it. This is it's reached an incredible fever pitch. But which one wins out, emotion or stoicism? At the end of the day, I think it's fair to say that on the ground, if you look at the military situation, and you look at any military maps, accurate maps, whether they're coming from the Ukraine side, the Russian side, the US side, the EU side, any military maps, I think point to the fact that this is a foregone conclusion. That Russia is going to win the ground war. We're not saying it's good or bad or taking sides. War is horrible. No. We don't condone war. I come from a country that has been invaded and that has been split apart by war by Turkey, for which the Greek government decided not to say anything about that when they decided to send weapons to the conflict, which is a different video at a different time. But I understand war very, very well. I understand invasion very, very well on a personal level. With regards to Russia and Ukraine, I am Orthodox. They are both Orthodox countries. I have been to Ukraine. I have been to Russia, both when it was under the Soviet Union and when it was out of the Soviet Union as well. So I understand Russia as well. We have very, very close ties as Greeks to Russians and to Ukrainians, and to Serbians and to Romanians. I mean, we are Orthodox. We are an Orthodox type of brotherhood. So anybody that is censoring, and I'm saying this mostly for YouTube, that is thinking that this is some sort of propaganda outlets, or that this is, I saw someone on Twitter saying that we're Russian amplifiers or Kremlin amplifiers. It's ridiculous. I get very, very angry when I see people who live 5,000 miles away, and have never been to those countries, don't speak the languages, are not of that religion, calling us amplifiers when I am of that religion. I have been to those countries many, many times. I've lived in those countries many, many times. I come from a country, Greece, which has excellent relations with Orthodox nations and with Russia and with Ukraine. and we have a lot of understanding of the region. Alexander has studied the history in detail. He is one of the experts when it comes to Russia and Russian politics and geopolitics and history. So all of these people that are saying this stuff, go F off. F off. You have no idea what you're talking about. And we are not amplifiers. As a matter of fact, we're not sponsored by any NGO. We're not sponsored by any government. We have taken zero money from any government or any NGO or anybody affiliated on any side. And that includes the Cypriot and the Greek government. So we have not received one penny, whether you're talking about RT, whether you're talking about Russia, whether you talk about Ukraine, whether you talk about the United States, whether you talk about Greece or Cyprus or the European Union. We have not received zero freaking money. As a matter of fact, Alexander, in order for us to live our life, we have to sell these awesome, incredible magic mugs. which increase your geopolitical IQ by thousands and thousands of points. That is how we live. You've seen my walks. You've seen where I live in Athens. The neighborhood that I live in is not anything ritzy or anything. You see the graffiti, you see it all. We are as transparent as can freaking be. And I'm saying this mostly for the YouTube censors and the YouTube overlords, because we do want to broadcast to YouTube, and we love broadcasting on Rumble, and we love broadcasting now on Odyssey. Anyway, that is what I had to say. And everything that we say, everybody, it may not be nice. It may not be what people want to hear. We understand that people are emotional, but our job is to just try and bring the facts. And yes, it is important to bring the Russian perspective, because if we don't understand the Russian perspective, then we're never going to understand how we got in this mess to begin with. And there are thousands and thousands of sites that bring you the Western mainstream media perspective. Alexander, Kathy Newman of the BBC gave a ridiculous question. She was talking about the children and whether Lavrov has blood on his hands. It is stuff like that that shows how idiotic these journalists are. And how me and you are just trying to bring the truth and the facts to this. I believe Kathy Newman was the one that got spanked by Jordan Peterson and got humiliated by Jordan Peterson. So, they're trying to manipulate things, and they're trying to demonize all sides involved. And finally, we're not going to get caught up in the crossfire. If any organization wants to take any of this content, whether you're Russian organization, whether you're Ukrainian, whether you're American, whether you're English, whether you're Greek, I don't freaking care. If anyone wants to use our content, please contact us. We're very transparent about using our content. We don't try to enforce copyrights and all stuff like that. We don't like that stuff. We believe in the free press. We believe in free speech. But if you are going to use our content, specifically with regards to this conflict, please contact us, and please understand that our live streams are 2 to 3 hours freaking long. So if you're going to take a 30-second segment or a 1-minute segment, it would be good for us to know in what context you're presenting that, because, when we talk about stuff here on this community, all of us, as we're discussing this, I mean, there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of gray area. It's not all black and white all the time. Anyway, that is the intro. Alexander Lavrov speaking to the press, emotion versus stoicism, the ground war, the media war, the sanctions war. How are things playing out? Well, I will put it on slow motion, everybody. By the way, I'll put the chat on slow mo. 1 second.
I should say I've never been involved in a war, and I'm not a person who understands military matters especially well. That's never been my particular interest. I agree with Alex's analysis of the military situation. I think everybody that I've spoken to who has any understanding or knowledge of this has confirmed this, that steadily, incrementally, step by step, the Russians are tightening their grip on the parts of Ukraine that they're aiming for. And that's what I'm going to first of all say about that. In all other respects, I want to say that I fully endorse all the points that Alex made just now. We are two people, we're two human beings, we have our opinions, we have our views, we try to analyze the facts, we are extremely careful to distinguish between our opinions and our guesses and reported facts, which is not something, by the way, that you see many people do. Most people who are reporting this conflict on both sides are confusing, are combining their opinions with their reporting. This has been a trend all along, and we're extremely careful to separate what we know from what we think, and what we think from what our opinions about it are. So, I mean, that's one thing which we are, I believe, very rigorous, far more rigorous about than almost everyone else. And in all other respects, I want to completely agree with Alex. I would just add something else. I mean, he talks about calm and passion, calm and emotion. I think particularly at a time like this, people need to keep a level head, because there's a very strong tendency for things to get out of control. And if we turn to the sanctions war, we see how that has happened. A few weeks ago, everybody was looking at the sanctions. They would say we've got to be very careful how we calibrate these sanctions. We mustn't do things that will impact on our own economy. And there was a whole succession of decisions about what they would do. They started off saying we're going to restrict technology imports. They said that they would end Nord Stream 2. Well, that was, as I said, baked in the cake. They decided that they would do various other things, but they said they wouldn't go after SWIFT. They wouldn't go after the central bank. I didn't even know that was even being discussed, actually. And they wouldn't, of course, go against oil and gas exports. The result is that in the passions of the hour, all the advice from the experts has been ignored. We've now seen SWIFT sanctions imposed, though there's been some attempt, I think, over the last few hours to draw them back by excluding certain critically important banks from them. We see sanctions against the central bank, which are, as I said, unprecedented. And there's been a very, very interesting article about this in Zero Hedge, with comments from Zoltan Pojar, who's a former senior official in various US financial institutions, saying that this is a turning point in monetary history, the end of US dollar hegemony, and the acceleration towards a bipolar monetary order. I don't think that should be controversial. As I said, this is apparently the advice the Federal Reserve Board and the European and Wall Street banks were giving to their governments. And that advice was disregarded, and we see the consequences, and they're going to now unravel, and they're going to unravel, I think, more quickly than has been suggested by Mr. Pojar. But that's the first thing to say. And now, on top of everything else, we're starting to hear rumblings and rumors and demands that we go a whole step further, and we start sanctioning Russian oil supplies. And the result is that oil is now priced at $113 a barrel. It's continuing to rise. There's a freeze in trading in Russian oil. Now, all of this is most likely, very likely, going to create a recession in Russia. But it really risks creating a severe recession in the West as well. And this is what emotion does. It runs away with you. It makes you take decisions which you later regret. And I will say this, the Russians almost certainly have a plan for how to deal with sanctions. The Russian parliament is meeting today. The government's prepared its various ideas. They can always retreat into self-sufficiency. There's many things they can do. We don't have a plan, because we are driving our decisions on the basis of emotion. So one has to retain a level head in these situations. One can be very, very angry. One can denounce things to one's heart's content. But as I always say, decisions made in anger are repented at leisure. And if we have a serious recession in the West in the autumn, well, nobody is going to thank the political leaders who have got us there, even if, you know, the way in which this information struggle is being carried out, most people blame Vladimir Putin for it. So I think these are points I want to make about the information war and the question of emotion versus reason. Powerful leaders of powerful states have a particular obligation to retain control of their emotions in this kind of situation. In 1962, at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, JFK, President of the United States, retained control of his emotions. He didn't let anger take sway and take control of his decisions. He pushed aside those people who did exist at that time in the United States, in the government, who were demanding uncontrolled escalation. And as a result, the world breathed safely. And that's what we need in the West today. We're not getting it at the moment. And it's what this channel ultimately is all about. That's what I wanted. That's what I wanted to say. And it goes back directly to the introduction. Now, having started with that, I want to just come to a few of the points. Alex has talked about the military situation. I've been talking with various military people or ex-military people. As I said, I'm not a military person. It's becoming increasingly clear that the military situation in Ukraine is going against Ukraine. I cannot comprehend how anybody would ever thought it would go otherwise. And I am deeply troubled when I go to the media today and I read in the Western media all kinds of stories and claims. I was reading that, Zelensky's claimed that 9,000 Russian soldiers have been killed, which, I mean, I think that's a fantastic claim. Actually, all of these claims, I read all these stories, all these anecdotes about, people turning back the tanks with petrol bombs and those kind of things. I mean, it's a collapse into fiction. So the effect of this military campaign, however, is that it has led to substantive, or at least what look like the substantive negotiations between the Russians and the Ukrainians, something which hasn't happened since 2014. And we will see where those go. And we will see whether there's any specific outcome to those negotiations. There's all sorts of parties coming forward to act as mediators. Lavrov had much to say about this in his press conference. He spoke about how Russians are making perfectly reasonable demands, that their demands are in fact minimal. They're not seeking to conquer, occupy Ukraine or those sort of things, but they do want to make sure that the situation there is protected. So we will see what comes of these negotiations. I'm not especially optimistic about them, but the fact is that the military campaign, and this is a fact, has resulted in substantive negotiations, talks between these two countries. The other thing that it is doing, and I think this is the other thing to say, is that it is finally and conclusively severing the links, the economic and commercial links between Russia and the West that were built up after the Cold War. And I think that people need to understand that. I think what we're going to see is that Russia will start to, it is already busy introducing capital controls. We're going to start to see moves in Russia to try to wean itself off from imports of Western consumer goods. And we're going to see a major pivot east. And with Russia, and I say this, I'm being objective, Russia being absorbed into the Chinese economic system. I mean, it's going to be, what we're looking at is Eurasia, certainly, but Eurasia is increasingly starting to look like what perhaps realistically it was always going to be, which is Greater China. And I think that that's now almost certain. I'm not sure how that helps the West, but that's where we're going. So a military campaign that can only have one outcome, potential negotiations which may or may not achieve an outcome, and a complete reordering of the economic landscape, which will mean a fracture, an end of the globalized world economy that we have known and which evolved after the Cold War. That, it seems to me, is where we are.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see when all of the dust settles, how much of the linkages that have been severed can be can be reattached. For example, the flight restrictions. That's something that I'm
Yeah,
sure will be, taken back. All these flight restrictions
I
from
agree.
over
I
Russia or over Europe. Well, maybe. I mean, maybe. I mean, Belarus.
maybe.
They put flight restrictions on Belarus,
Yeah,
a year ago
yeah,
because of the
yeah.
Protasevich, I believe was his name, the
Yeah, the
Protasevich,
Protasevich
yeah,
episode. Yeah,
it's episode,
yeah,
which was incidentally a regime change operation against
yeah,
Belarus. People
yeah,
don't want to talk about that.
yeah,
Not to mention that after the Belarus regime change, you had the
mm,
Kazakhstan regime change anyway.
yeah,
No one wants to
yeah.
talk about that
No,
either.
no,
But the
no,
Protasevich air restrictions have not been lifted. So
no,
even there is not a
no,
certainty that all of these air
no,
restrictions would be
no,
lifted. Who
no,
knows?
no.
Um, Toilet Sauce has a super chat here, which may explain a lot of the reasoning why many restrictions will not be lifted. And his comment says, "Isn't a severe recession exactly what the West wants? Great reset. Aren't these skyrocketing fuel prices exactly what the globalists couldn't achieve with their CO2 tax?"
Mm.
Uh,
Well,
God's sake, one sec. I lost the last two words of that super chat. I hate it when the super chats go up and then they
I know I
disappear
do
like
the
that.
same. Yeah, I can't
Freaking
bear it
hate it.
either.
Anyway,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
I think you understand Toilet Sauce
yeah.
is
Absolutely, and
his question is comment.
he may very well be right. All I will say about that is maybe it is what they want, but I mean, it's nonetheless another step in sawing off the branch on which you're sitting. I mean, create a major economic recession, and this could be a very severe recession. I mean, with the way things are heading, um, I cannot see how that is going to strengthen the political structures in the West that upon which the globalist project ultimately rests. But if that is the intention, if that's the plan, well, it is being executed. But that's the result that we're going to see, whether it's a plan or not, because I don't really see how we can avoid a recession now.
Yeah.
Notice, by the way, and I want to just say this. I mean, I had a chat the other day with a financial person. Oh well, I'll say who it was. It was Mitch Feinstein. Now he's been writing this book. He's been talking about Ponzi schemes, lots of things of that nature. And he said to me, he's always said that there will never be increases in interest rates. That all the talk about increasing interest rates that we've had over the last few weeks is simply not real. That they will find some reason not to increase interest rates. And he pointed to the latest events and he said, look what's happened. Already we see the Fed is now saying that in light of what's happened, interest rates are not going to be increased. So higher inflation still. Remember, inflation ultimately undermines demand because people paying more and more for their goods can have less and less to spend, and that results, either stagflation, or which is stagnation plus inflation, or perhaps in this case a recession.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that
Yeah,
recession is also
yeah.
inevitable at this point in
Well,
time.
indeed,
The
and
the,
it
the
can
narrative.
I
Yeah.
go on,
No,
go on.
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and I mean, this was perhaps the moment when one was looking to the president of the United States to chart a clear course forward, to tell us what he's going to do. And we had a State of the Union address yesterday. And again, this is my opinion. I know there's others who won't agree with me on this, but there was a State of the Union address yesterday, which was, I thought, a chaotic jumble with slips and confusions of words and things which, to be frank, I thought made the whole effect look dismal. So there is a total absence of proper leadership as well, how to deal with the recession problems that are now looming.
Yeah, I believe that as the military campaign wraps up, and I don't know when it'll
Yeah,
wrap up. I don't know if it'll be. We don't even know the exact scope of it because I
no,
hear there's a lot of people saying that one of the questions that was thrown at
yeah,
Lavrov was you guys weren't greeted as liberators and this. And I think that's kind of a silly. It's an interesting
yeah,
question because wasn't that the narrative that was being thrown out there when the U.S. when the U.S. invaded Iraq, that they would be greeted as liberators? So it's interesting to see how they're
yeah,
repackaging and reusing that in this
yeah,
case. But a lot of
yeah,
people are saying, well, and one of the questions to Lavrov was, you went into Ukraine and you weren't treated as liberators. And we don't. And Lavrov's answer was interesting because he's like, well, you guys can kind of made that assumption, not us. You
Yeah.
don't know what our plans were.
Yeah.
We kept everything very, very secret.
Yeah.
And you have no idea exactly what we're going to do. And that is true even
Yeah.
at this moment. I mean, we're saying, and I just said
Mm.
right now that as the military campaign wraps up, but even I don't quite know
No.
what
No.
exactly that
No.
means. I mean, the
No.
only statements we got from the Russian Security Council and from Putin was that this was a denazification campaign and a demilitarization campaign. And they have also said, to be fair, they said that they're not interested in occupying Ukraine. So I mean,
Yeah.
these three statements, that's really the only
Yeah.
thing that we have to go on, and it goes back to the
Yeah.
stoicism and the secrecy of the
Yeah.
Russian government. And I've said it in many videos that this is very much akin to a boxing match where one of the boxers is just putting up their guard, and they're just taking hit after hit after hit after hit. They're not going down. They're not being knocked down. Yes, they're being hurt, but they haven't been knocked down, and they haven't really punched back either, though.
No.
They're just kind of, just putting up their guard and just taking the punches for the time being. And it looks like they're waiting for the later rounds. Maybe they're waiting for the 8th or 9th or 10th round in order to do something.
Yes.
But I do see another problem that is going to start creeping out for the media war. And the Russians, I think, listening to Lavrov, I think they're going to start to play that up. I don't know to what extent, given the fact that all Russian media has been completely, black holed, and maybe that's part of the reason. What I'm going to say is maybe part of the reason as to why it's been black holed. And what I'm going to say is actually kind of sensitive. Once again, we're just trying to paint a real picture, and that has to do with the fact that George Stephanopoulos gave a question to Lavrov, and they brought up the whole Azov battalion. Right sector. I can start naming names, Tiana Book and Dmitry Yarosh. And there's a lot of sketchy characters, going back 8 years. And if you want to go back to World War II, you can start bringing up Bandera. But, Stephanopoulos kind of had an exchange with Lavrov, and he was saying, well, Lavrov said this about the denazification as well. And Stephanopoulos was like, are you trying to tell me that, Zelensky has NAZI people in and around him? And I thought that was an interesting way to frame it. And I thought two things, Alexander. Number one is, it's going to be difficult for the collective West to hide the fact that Ukraine does have this problem, and they've had it for many years and decades. This is not a secret. This is a problem. And the Azov battalion in the right sector, and people like Yarosh. There's some, like I said, there are a lot of people recently, and if you go back to Bandera, that are problematic for Ukraine, specifically for the west of Ukraine. And this is also not a Zelensky problem, though. They try to make it that because Zelensky is of Jewish origin, that it would be impossible for him to have these forces in and around him. This is not a Zelensky issue. These forces have been embedded in the military, in the government for a very long time. And most recently, Petro Poroshenko had the same exact problems, the same exact problems as Zelensky, which was, how do you deal with these far right forces, and how do you deal with the Azov battalion, which exert a lot of power? So, a West that has been so obsessed with white supremacy and NAZI, and Donald Trump is this, and these people are that, so we're going to censor them, that have been pushing out this problem for the better part of 5 years and censoring on it and expressing moral outrage about it, could have a difficult time trying to justify their support of the government, whether it was Poroshenko or Zelensky. That's why, take the person out of it, of a government that really does have these problems. And in many cases, a military, in much the same way that IS was funded by Obama, jihadists were funded by Obama. We have to say the truth there. You have these forces, these very, very far right forces, which have been funded by, the Biden administration, the Trump administration as well, and the European Union. And there you run into the whole European values thing. It's difficult to square the circle as a Greek And I've seen the outrage over Golden Dawn, which is a far-right group in Greece. I've seen the moral outrage over Golden Dawn, and then I try to square the circle and say, well, you guys are outraged with Golden Dawn, but on the flip side, Mitsotakis, you're giving weapons that will end up possibly in the hands of the Azov battalion. How do you square the circle there?
You're absolutely right about this, but they will square the circle in one very simple way. They will hide the circle. I mean, I've been reading. It's very depressing doing, by the way, but I've been reading commentaries and articles in the British newspapers and the American newspapers. And the most astonishing thing about this is that you mentioned the Azov battalion, you mentioned Right Sector, you mentioned all of these groups. You won't find any references to them there. For example, there is a major battle now going on in an East Ukrainian town called Mariupol. And it is widely known that Azov battalion is in fact deeply embedded there. Bear in mind, Mariupol is a coastal city on the Sea of Azov. So it's called the Azov battalion for that reason. But what I've been reading in the media here in Britain manages to talk about Mariupol without mentioning so I think that's the approach they're going to take. They're going to say, well, look, we don't want to discuss this. We don't discuss this. This is clearly something that we don't touch upon. And I have to say, to a great extent, it works. Speaking to people here in Britain, people who are not engaged in politics, who haven't been following this story with the kind of intention that we have over 8 years, well, very, very few people do this. Always remember that. Most people don't know when you talk about the Azov battalion, most people haven't heard of it. They have no idea what that is. And I think that is how they're going to solve that particular problem. My own view is that a far bigger problem is going to come if Zelensky and the Russians over the next couple of hours or days come to a deal with each other. Now that, I think, would be a real problem, given the way that they built up Zelensky, of all people, into some great war leader of an embattled nation taking on the Russian military almost single-handed, and all of that. That I think is a problem that they would really struggle to explain. And this brings me, I think, to what I suspect is part of the point of this military operation. Now, the Russians actually, as you rightly say, have been extremely careful to say as little as possible about it. They've never disclosed a timetable. So people who say that, that they've fallen behind their timetable, we don't know what their timetable was. So how can we say that? We don't know what their timetable was. They've never given us a timetable. They've set out their aims in a very general way. As DNI and NAZI, whatever, we know what that means, and demilitarization, which and of course they also presumably want to take steps to ensure the viability of these two people's republics that they've just now recognized, the Donetsk and Lugansk people's republics. But they've said two things. Firstly, they said they have no plan to occupy Ukraine. That's one thing they said. Now, I presume that means all of Ukraine outside the historic Lugansk and Donetsk oblasts. And the other thing that they said, and by the way, I mention this because so much of the commentary in the West that talks about these great battles in Kiev and Kharkiv and all of those places doesn't say this, that they are not going to attack residential areas or civilian infrastructure. Now, you can treat that with a great deal of cynicism. But if we're talking about Kiev, I know less about the situation in Kharkiv. But if you're talking about Kiev, there has been no attempt so far to storm Kiev. And over the course of his press conference, Lavrov said that there are no Russian troops inside Kharkiv either. So that suggests that much of what we've been reading about the situation in Kharkiv follows the same pattern. By the way, on the question of Kharkiv, there was a report, I can't say how accurate it was, that the former interior minister of Ukraine, a man called Arsen Avakov, who is very important person in Ukraine, has just visited Kharkiv, and that some of the troops there, some of whom apparently are troops aligned with these right-wing forces, are actually being withdrawn from Kharkiv in order to concentrate them around Kiev, in which case, of course, the situation in Kharkiv could also change. Now, I want to stress that's a report. I can't corroborate it. No information from the ground in Kharkiv. I can't say to what extent that is or is not true. So we've got to be careful when we describe Russian intentions and timetables. People are not looking at what the Russians said at the outset, and they're inventing timetables which are being spun out of the whole cloth, spun out of the complete air. What I think the Russian objective is, and I stress again, I think, I don't know. I mean, Lavrov, Putin, Shoigu, all of these people don't share their plans with me. I mean, coming back to what Alex was saying, we're not plugged into the Russian thinking on these issues. But what I think it is, judging from what has happened, is to try to separate Zelensky from these hard right forces and to come to some kind of deal with him. I think that's what they're trying to do. Whether that's possible, if that is indeed their intention, is another matter. But note that he has refused, apparently, I'm talking about Zelensky now, he's refused US pressure to leave Kiev. Apparently, he's still there. And he has sent his people to Belarus to sit down and talk with the Russians. So, we'll see what comes of this.
I believe that is the exact intention. Once again, that may not be the intention. Maybe the Russians want to take all of Ukraine, but I believe that the intention is, and listening to someone like Colonel McGregor as well on Fox News with Trey Gowdy and with Tucker Carlson, and listening to Scott Ritter as well.
Yeah.
I believe the intention that you just outlined makes sense. Yeah. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but it makes sense that they've taken it to this point where they've surrounded pretty much all the major cities. They're about to surround Odessa as well. They're moving very quickly from north to south. They've created two cauldrons. Dr. Steve Turley, I think, really explains it well, where he says it's a cauldron within a cauldron. So you have the East Cauldron, which is a cauldron of 60,000 Azov guys who are pretty much surrounded. And then you have the bigger cauldron, which is pretty much splitting the country in two, from the Dnipro east and leaving the west as a rump kind of of state. And I believe the strategy is exactly what you said. Let's surround the cities. Let's isolate the West, where we know they have this far right problem.
Yes.
I mean, they know that. Or at least I'm speaking from the Russian perspective. Always from the Russian perspective as I'm explaining this. And I don't have any information. I'm just trying to think how they're thinking.
Yes.
Let's not deal with it, because they haven't really mentioned Lviv or anything. They haven't really gone into that in detail at all. Let's not deal with it. Let's try to separate Zelensky. And when I say Zelensky, I want to stress again, it could be Poroshenko, it could be Zelensky. It doesn't matter.
No.
They're trying to say, let's get the government,
the
main people in the government, removed from the entrenched far-right forces that have been in there for so many years or decades. Let's try to separate those two, detach them, speak to the government, come to a solution, and let this new government that's finally detached from these far-right forces then deal with these far-right forces with our help. To have a sort of a government that they control, that the Russians control. That's what they're going to put in place. A government that they control, whether it's Zelensky or anybody else. Yanukovych, doesn't matter what the name is. The name, the religion, I don't think any of that matters. Government that they control, that's finally detached from these far-right forces, so that then they can deal with these far-right forces. I mean, I don't know. And that's pretty much what McGregor and Ritter, I think, I'm not going to speak for them, I think that's what they're also trying to say as well.
Yes, that's how it looks to me. Now, again, I want to stress again, this is purely my assessment, Alex's assessment, the assessment of all of these other people, but it makes sense to me. And that's clear. That seems to make sense of the particular pattern of activities. And, whether it succeeds or fails, who knows? I mean, it may be impossible, but it's interesting to see that the Russians have clearly explained their positions, what they're trying to do to key international players. They've kept the Chinese informed, obviously. They've kept India informed, obviously. And that's why we see those two big, powerful countries seem to be taking a fairly even-handed approach to this, which ultimately leans, it must be stressed, to the Russian side. And I think it's because the Russians have explained, look, our intention is, to the extent that we can, to try to negotiate a solution to this problem, a comprehensive solution that will stabilize the situation in our Western regions and in our Western border. I just wanted to add one particular point, which goes back to Alex's point about the regime change attempt in Belarus, because I have to say that I think that we are only seeing a tip of an iceberg of things that have been going on for at least 2 or 3 years. I think that starting in 2020, probably beyond then, all kinds of covert conflicts and struggles have been going on in this area, in this region. Might even have started with that split in the churches, if you remember. Something has been going on under the surface, which we're extremely uninformed about. And I think that eventually, when we get the full history of this, which, by the way, may not happen in our lifetimes, when we get the full history of this, we will start to see that some of these events, which look surprising and difficult to understand, make sense in the context of this underground struggle about which we are extremely ill-informed.
Yeah. From Euro Gabor says the UK Visegrad Force Summit will be held in London on March 8th. Given the current geopolitical situation in Europe, what do you think Boris Johnson is up to?
Well, I have no idea what Boris Johnson is up to. Can I just say, and I've defended Boris Johnson in the past over the Brexit thing, for example, but one of the most destructive things is that in an atmosphere of hysteria, which is what we've had, or I don't call it hysteria, let's call it overexcited emotion. I'm afraid demagogues can do a great deal of damage. And Johnson has, over the course of this conflict, positioned himself very much in that way. That's my own opinion. He's been the person who's taken the most extreme positions on almost everything, be it SWIFT, which, as I said, I think was a serious mistake. My own personal view. We've discussed why. All these other things. And of course, the Visegrad meeting is not going to achieve anything. It's not going to make any difference. But it does give Johnson this opportunity again to pose as the great champion, the person who's leading the struggle, who's forcing the Europeans and all of these other people to stand up to the bear that's on the prowl. And it's doing harm and damage. And I think, to be straightforward about it, the motives of it are pretty cynical.
All right. Glacier says, talk about Georgia, please. Lots of NGOs here to manipulate people. Zelensky tried to get an airplane to pick people to fight. Prime Minister applied for EU emergency membership. Brandon model of your headset, Alexander. Do you know the Brandon model of your headset or no?
No.
Okay.
Georgia. But anyway,
Georgia, which is an interesting story because they did apply for emergency or expedited EU membership.
Very interesting.
You know, and I'll just say a real quick thing. When I was in Kiev in 2013, I remember people were saying, not all the people, we want to get into Europe. We want to get into Europe. And I was like, well, I'm coming from Greece. And I'll tell you this, you don't want to get into Europe because all Europe is going to do to you is make you a hell of a lot poorer and a hell of a lot more miserable. But that was coming from Greece after seeing what Europe did to Greece, which has completely destroyed the country. But Georgia seems to be wanting the same punishment. I don't understand the masochistic attitude, but hey, you know. Anyway,
I'm going to take a more cynical view of all of this. The really important fact about Georgia, and by the way, Moldova, is that they have refused to impose sanctions on Russia. and they've also stopped. Certainly in the case of Georgia, they've stopped volunteers going to Ukraine to fight the Russians. Now that, I think those are big moves, and they suggest that the Georgian and Moldovan governments are very conscious of economic issues and, of course, of Russian power, and they are not going to take some of these sort of steps that people said that they've been talking about taking. But of course, at the same time, there are lots of anti-Russian, pro-Western people in both Georgia and Moldova who are going to be very angry with their respective governments. And of course, there's also the hardliners in the EU who must be extremely angry with the governments of those countries that are not taking these hardline positions on the crisis that they're expected to. So what do you do in this situation? You take the actual practical steps. You don't impose sanctions. You refuse to impose sanctions. In the case of Moldova, you rule out membership of NATO. In the case of Georgia, you stop sending volunteers. You stop volunteers from going to Ukraine. But at the same time, you swear fealty to your Western overlords by asking for an expedited joining of the EU, which you know perfectly well isn't going to happen. So I take a deeply cynical view of this whole episode. And by the way, notice that Josep Borrell has visited Moldova. And I think partly the reason he went there was precisely because I think the EU was, frankly, annoyed that Moldova refused to impose the sanctions. And I think he went to Moldova, to Chisinau, to make absolutely sure that the Moldovan government, which the EU has made a huge effort to try and install, isn't shifting position, and that its loyalty to the West remains as before. So I'm afraid, as I said, I take a cynical view of these sort of matters.
Well, one sec, Alexander. Great review, guys. That comes from Lansoel.
Yeah.
What did I want to say? Yeah, Borrell needs to resign. Borrell needs
absolutely.
to resign. He needs to step down, as does Ursula von der Leyen. She needs to resign as well, because she's now doomed Europe, all European Union countries, to a living hell over the next 2 to 3 years. A living freaking hell, and they should resign. All of them should resign. We talk a lot about, well, just real quick, we talk a lot about energy and gas, and all of this, but a narrative that we have been talking about. And if you go back to one of our shows with the great Robert Barnes that we did, gosh, it must have been 3 months ago. The show was actually dedicated to fertilizer. And we talked about some of the problems that could come up with fertilizer. Obviously, we didn't know that there would be this conflict, which would create, exponential problems with fertilizer now. But we talked about this and how this is a problem. And Tucker Carlson actually brought it up last night for the first time as well. So, I mean, all these people have grossly mismanaged the situation. And it is not only about oil and gas, though you need gas for the fertilizer, but it's metals, it's minerals, it's potash, it's all kinds of things. These people must resign. I
completely agree. And there was a specific moment where with Borrell, in my opinion, has shown his total inadequacy. And I have to say something else. I mean, again, this isn't something which I like saying, but I've long been aware that there is that many people in Europe, especially in Europe, more in Europe, in my opinion, than in the US. That's the conclusion I've come to, that there are many, many people in Europe with visceral feelings about the Russians. I am been profoundly shocked at the extent to which these exist. I'd imagined, I'd not realized that they're so deep and they're so entrenched and that they cloud judgment. And so, I mean, all these meetings between the Russians and European officials have to be seen now in a particular perspective, given, as I said, the kind of things that have been happening over the last few days. But anyway, Borrell, the moment, in my opinion, when Borrell should have resigned, in fact, not just resigned, should have been told to resign or sacked, was when he came up with this crazy plan to send fighter jets to Ukraine. And he committed fighter jets from all sorts of East European countries, Poland, Slovakia, Bulgaria, you name it. And he was going to have them 70 fighter jets based in Poland. I mean, it's a crazy plan, ludicrous plan. And remember, the EU isn't supposed to be a military alliance. And of course, the governments of these countries, even the Polish government, which is, whatever it is, it can't be accused of being sympathetic to Russia, said absolutely not. And a foreign minister, because that's what Borrell likes to believe he is, who comes up with a proposal as zany as that, and one which is shot down as quickly as that one was, really has no business being in his job, and he should have resigned or told to leave. Unfortunately, as we've discussed so many times, so many programs that we've done with the EU, the more you fail, the more you succeed, coming up with the craziest plans, ideas that could really trigger World War III from Josep Borrell, doesn't mean that he's either embarrassed or that he's going to be held to account for them. And the result is that he is still there and he's still wreaking havoc, just as Ursula von der Leyen is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. WSIM101 says, will Russia capture CIA agents?
The word is, right, okay, this is something which was explained to me by a former CIA people. I think it might have been John Kiriakou, but I'm not going to swear to it, is that the CIA runs two types of people. There are CIA officials who are Americans and who are on the who are paid a salary by the CIA. I think all of those people, or nearly all of them, have been extracted from Ukraine. I don't think they are in Ukraine to any great extent. And then there are CIA agents. These are people who are not officially on the CIA payroll. They're not salaried people, but they get paid by the CIA as agents, and they're nearly always the citizens of other countries. In this case, Ukraine, but there's probably others like that in Ukraine too. I suspect lots of the latter will be rounded up as a result of this affair. And no doubt the Russians will be questioning them very hard. And of course, it's not impossible that at some point they could be put on trial.
Yeah, I think there will be, when all of this is said and done, there will be some trials. Lots of trials. Let's see. Alan Shepard says Putin is holding until he finishes the war so he can capitalize on the sanctions to force Europeans to his will.
Well, that the problem here, let's be clear about this. I mean, I don't think, to what extent Putin has game planned anything, I don't know. But would Putin have assumed that the Europeans would do all these crazy things that they have done? In other words, disconnect Russia from SWIFT, impose sanctions on the central bank, and now talk about oil and gas embargoes and blockades. I mean, if he has done that, then obviously he's taking enormous risks. But perhaps he understands the Europeans, and he's familiar with the state of things in his own country, and he knows that support in his country will be solid as he sees this thing through, and perhaps that will bend the Europeans to his will. But again, that's a speculation, and it's based on the assumption that the Europeans would act as incompetently or as recklessly as they have indeed acted. I mean, it may be that's the outcome, but I'm not sure that was the plan.
I would imagine that they game planned all of the financial stuff out to the absolute worst. I mean, I like you said, I think they went all the way up the ladder, and they game planned all of that out. My own hunch would be that they may have not believed that they would take the sanctions to the level. And I wouldn't even call it sanctions. I don't think they believed that they would see the collective West galvanized to try and cancel a culture and a
Yeah,
people.
I know.
And there you start to see, moving beyond
Yeah,
the conflict in Ukraine, there you start to see something really scary, which we saw glimpses
yeah,
of, not even
yeah,
glimpses. We actually saw it in practice with regards to the coup, and we
yeah,
saw it in practice with regards to the Freedom Convoy, where you see the financial, the NGO, the institutions, big
yeah,
tech, government move as one unit in order
yes,
to either cancel individuals, whether that individual made a $10 payment to the Freedom Convoy, or to
yeah,
cancel out a country. And the cancelization of a country is covering all aspects of the way that country is integrated into the world order. That includes athletics, entertainment, technology, payment systems, everything. But they
yes,
all move in lockstep. And
yeah,
we saw that with Russiagate a little bit. We
yeah,
saw that a little bit with Ukraine Gate, a little bit more. We saw a lot
mm,
of it with the
mm,
coup. And then we saw a shocking amount of it with the Freedom Convoy, because we actually saw these very powerful forces not go
yeah,
after Alex Jones, not go after Tommy Robinson, who are public figures, famous people,
yeah,
but they actually went after just your everyday,
yeah,
cafe owner who says, you know what, I'm going to chip in $20 to
I
the
know,
truckers
yeah,
because they're,
no,
they seem like they need it and they need fuel,
yeah,
and I don't want them to sleep, in the cold and stuff like that. And we saw that happening with Freedom Convoy. Now we're seeing it happen with a country and a culture. I don't know if they expected it to reach that level,
no, I don't think
but
they did.
I will say one thing,
Yeah,
and you may want to comment on this. Putin did make a speech about a year ago, I want to say,
yeah,
where he mentioned something along the lines of, if you try to cancel Russia, like Russia as a culture, as a history, the whole world loses. And he was
yeah,
referencing Russian literature,
yeah,
Russian culture,
yeah,
Russian history. And he was, so maybe he did expect something like this, because he did reference that in a speech. I know you know the speech that I'm talking
yes,
about,
absolutely.
where he did say it would be a shame for the entire world
Yes,
to be deprived of what Russia has contributed to the
yeah,
world. And I say that also when I talk about, say, a culture like Iran
yeah,
and Persia. These are great cultures.
mm,
Historically, these are cultures that stretch 1,000+ years
yeah,
back. It's
yeah,
you can't just erase these cultures and these histories, because they've contributed so much to who we are.
mm.
And I think Putin hinted at that. So I don't know. Maybe he knew it would reach this level. Maybe he didn't. I'm not sure.
My sense is he did know it would reach this level. Remember he's had to interact with Western officials all the time, as he's had to interact as other officials of his government have done also. So I think he has, over time, gradually come to understand what they think of him and of his country and of its culture. And I think it has been a very difficult thing. And I think it explains a lot of his feelings and the strong feelings that he clearly has, which, by the way, more and more Russians are going to share. I'm going to say who didn't expect it. And I have to say this about myself. I mean, I'd expected everything. I'd expected, I was prepared for everything, up to and including the sanctions on the Russian central bank. I saw the way they acted with the Afghan central bank and how they seized its reserves. And I remember going back in time, the way in which they seized Libya's sovereign wealth fund and all those sort of things. So I was prepared for that, but that we would get to a situation where the International Olympic Committee is going so totally contrary to the founding principles of the Olympic movement as to advocate a worldwide ban on participation of all Russian sports people in all international competitions. That I never expected. I mean, that has shaken me to the core. I have to say that it suggests a antagonism, as I said, a visceral feelings towards Russians, which, I never quite believed existed. And if the International Olympic Committee is prepared to go that far. Well, are you surprised that Russian cats now can't participate in cat shows? I mean, I don't know, as I said, whether Putin expected that or whether it formed any part of his calculations. But I will say this, I personally have been very shocked by it. By the way, I've been shocked by it. My wife, who has sought to pursue academic exchanges, she's an academic with Russian universities, has been even more shocked about it than I am.
Yeah, Russia, from what I've read, and I haven't been able to confirm it or not, that they are throwing around plans to expel Russian students who are studying abroad in
Well,
Europe or the United States. I don't know what exactly the truth is to that.
No, I don't know what the truth is to that. I mean, there are Russian students at my wife's university, and no action has been taken against them. But in this atmosphere, anything is possible. And of course, there must be concerns for Russian students and the kind of interactions they're going to have over the next few weeks, months, and whatever. Bear in mind, the other thing that these people are facing is that with all these flight bans, if they want to return to their home fast, it's not going to be easy for them to do. There are ways of doing it. I mean, you can still take Chinese airlines, for example, and fly from, to take circuitous routes. And I expect that before long, the big Asian airlines will be doing routes from Moscow to Europe. But, we'll see.
Yeah. It's not going to turn people against the government.
In Russia,
it's going to harden their stance.
No, it is.
In
Well,
Russia,
I mean, the latest opinion polls show that Putin's popularity has grown.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing to say.
There was, this is anecdotal, of course, but I was reading an article via Summit News, and they were talking about how Apple Pay and Google Pay has kind of caused a bit of a problem in the metro in Moscow, because a lot of people pay with Apple Pay and Google Pay to get their metro cards, and it's created kind of long queues, and the people kind of just sitting at the entrance, having to pay for their ticket with cash or by other means. And in the article, they interviewed some people as to how they feel about this. And I think the West would like people to answer, damn it, the Putin government, look what they're doing to us. I'm sick of this. I can't believe they've made our lives harder. I want him gone. I think that would be the answer they would like to hear. But the answer they got was different. The answer they got was more along the lines of, this is what we get for integrating ourselves into the Western system. Yeah. I thought it was an interesting response. It's like, this is what we get for relying on Western tools and services and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're going to see more and more people in Russia express those views. When I say more and more people, I'm going to say something else. What we're going to see is a change in the way the Russian economy runs. The Russian economy, I talked a lot about the Russian economy. The Russian economy sought massive integration with the West in the 1990s, and that continued in a kind of way in the 2000s. I think what they're going to do, and you're going to start to see it, is a Russian model, which will be much more like the Chinese model, become adopted. There'll be strong capital controls. Of that, I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever. The period of free ruble convertibility into Western currencies is going. We're going to see Russians linking up with other economies. And I'm going to say something else. We're going to see returns to the kind of directive planning that we used to see, not in the Soviet Union. It's not going to go back to that kind of model, but the kind of industrial planning, centralized industrial planning that happened in South Korea, Japan, and of course, which still goes on a massive scale in China. So it's going to be a switch away from the Western model of economy. And from now on, they're going to be dealing with us on completely different terms.
Yeah. I'm going to read you what someone wrote on the chat, Alexander. This is the YouTube, I imagine, and this is probably a troll, but I don't know. How do you guys feel about the Kremlin funding anti-vax, pro-Trump, and pro-Brexit fake news? Poor conspiracy theorists. I just want to say real quick before you answer that, Alexander, that's how you lose
Yeah.
the support of the people, because for the past 6 years,
Yeah.
people have been fed to believe that, if you say something good about Trump,
Yeah.
you're a bad person. If you
Yeah.
support Trump, you're a bad person.
Yeah.
If you support Brexit, you're
Yeah.
a bad person.
Yeah.
If you don't believe in the vaxes, you're a bad person.
Yeah.
And they've taken it to the point where you're such a bad person that you're not allowed to go shopping. You're
Yeah.
not allowed to be on social media. You're not allowed to travel and get on planes. You're not allowed to protest. You're not allowed to do anything because
Yeah.
you go against the
Yeah.
the globalist dictate. And now you're seeing, once again, and the same thing with the Kremlin and with Russia. And then Russia has kind of been, part of this narrative thread since the beginning,
Mm,
since Trump.
mm,
Thank
mm,
you, Hillary Clinton and
mm.
Jake Sullivan, all these
Yeah.
people for
Yeah.
injecting Russia into that.
Yeah.
And so, if you like Trump, if you
Yeah.
supported Brexit, if you're anti-vax, if you supported the Freedom Convoy, then you're obviously a Kremlin stooge, right?
Yes.
And thus you aren't afforded any rights whatsoever as a human being, right? And that's been the picture of the person they've tried to create, because that's the person that they
Yeah.
want to destroy. And it's just so crazy. It's like, you know anybody that tries to look at the situation objectively,
Yeah.
or who just doesn't want to get a vax, or who supports
Mhm.
Brexit, or who says, I like Russian people, or I like Russia. It doesn't mean,
Yeah.
just because you like
Mm.
Russia, it doesn't mean you don't have to like Ukraine. I like Ukraine too.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
3 years ago, I visited Romania 6 times. Why? Because I like the country.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
I lived in the United
Yeah.
States. I love the
Yeah.
United States, but
Yeah.
there's no nuance. You're either with us
No,
or
no,
you
yeah.
need to be destroyed. It's not what George Bush said. You're either with us or you're against us. That's what George Bush said before he
Mm.
invaded Iraq. Now the narrative is you're either with us or we're going to destroy you.
Yes, I know. By the way, you're either with us or against us, was what Lenin and the Bolsheviks were saying. I don't know if people are aware of this. I just mentioned, I mean, it was actually one of their slogans, but put that aside. I mean, can I just say, talk about the Kremlin funding all these operations. We have had 2 gigantic investigations into specific and very, very detailed and massive allegations of the Kremlin funding to big events in the West. One was Donald Trump's election campaign in 2016, which won. He was supposed to be. You remember all that collusion that was supposed to have happened? Remember all of that? And the other was Brexit. And of course, there's been a massive campaign to try to prove that Brexit was also orchestrated and manipulated and achieved by the Russians in some kind of sinister way. And all sorts of people, like a millionaire called Aaron Banks, who I think has a Russian wife, were targeted and suspected of being involved in all of this. And we had massive campaigns in the United States. We had an equally big campaign in Britain, though the British campaign was more decentralized. It was carried out by many different organizations all looking into all of these allegations, and it didn't gain the same attention. And you know what? In both cases, it proved to be wrong. There was no collusion between the Russians and Donald Trump and his campaign. There was no collusion. There was no collusion between the Brexit campaign and the Russians either. The Russians didn't have any role in any of these things, just as they have no role in the Freedom Convoy or in anything else. This is a fantasy. Whenever it is investigated, it is proved to be untrue. And yet people still repeat it. How often must it be proved to be untrue before people finally accept the fact that it is untrue? The Kremlin isn't going to fund all of these bodies and organizations and campaigns because it knows perfectly well that the moment it did so and the moment the fact came out, those organizations, their credibility would collapse. And in some cases, and I'm talking now, thinking about anti-vax, it doesn't correspond with what the Kremlin believes anyway. If you know about the situation in Russia, and again, I'm being factual here, I'm not making any judgments. In Russia, the Kremlin has been campaigning against a lot of opposition and resistance to get as many people to take the jab as possible. So why would it want to undermine that by launching a worldwide campaign against doing it? So, this is all I can say about this. I mean, look at the facts, look at the investigations, read the Mueller report if you can bring yourself to read all that 600 pages of nonsense. And you will read all the reports that were done into the Brexit campaign, and you will find that none of these allegations stack up or have any basis in truth.
Yeah. And while you're at it, maybe you should read the Minsk
Agreement
protocol
as well.
the 2 pages
Exactly.
of it, and see why
Yeah.
they never agreed to it, why they never implemented it. That would give you a better understanding as to why we are where we are. Let's see.
Exactly.
Yeah. Rayo Dalal says, as always, keep up the amazing work, guys. The work you guys are doing does qualify you as Superman. Thank you very much for that. And Peace Chen, thank you for your super chat as well. And 1 second, let me just pull it up. From Flying Boar, Indian students are being held hostage by Ukrainians. What's the update on that? Will India get involved in this crisis? I've been following a lot of Indian news on this, Alexander. Can I just say one real quick thing?
Yeah.
And thank you to Kurt for sending me a lot of those links to Indian news. They've really jumped on the ethnic hypocrisy of this military operation compared with Iraq, Libya, and Yemen. I mean, they've really jumped on that, and how the media is so obsessed with this operation because of the ethnic makeup of the people involved, and how they've completely ignored the military operations in Yemen, which has killed 300,000 plus people, as well as Iraq, as well as Libya, as well as Syria. I mean, they've really jumped on this hypocrisy in a big, big way.
Yes. Well, exactly. And I haven't heard specifically that story about Indian students. But interestingly enough, I did read an article a couple of days ago in the Financial Times about Chinese students and Chinese people in Ukraine having serious difficulties. And there was an important conversation between the Chinese and Ukrainian foreign ministers, Wang Yi and Kuleba, the other day. And I did a program about it, when the part of it that dealt with the politics of it. But I mean, it was also very, very clear Chinese concern about getting their Chinese students and people out of Ukraine, and Kuleba promising assistance to achieve it. So I don't have factual details. To be straightforward about this, there is so much news out there, and it's so difficult sometimes to keep track of everything that's happening, that I haven't followed every part of what's going on, and I don't know the details of this. But that article in the Financial Times was there about the problems of Chinese students. And if that's happening to Chinese students, why wouldn't it happen to Indian ones as well?
Yeah. Let's see. Naibai, thank you for your super chat. Gregory says, far too many in our media conflate the facts with their opinions, something you are both exceedingly careful not to do. And thank you for this. Thank you very much for that. Gregory. Elena says, how is the German people taking what their leaders are doing? Do you think Russia can ultimately kill Nord Stream 2 by declaring bankruptcy? Is the German leadership prepared for that?
I don't know whether they are or not. I don't think they've game planned for it. I don't think they have any fallback plans. What I get from the situation in Germany is that the country is in a fever at the moment, pretty much like everywhere else is. It's very, very difficult to speak rationally and sensibly about this. Some people in the AfD are holding out, but overall, people are just being swept along. And again, it does make me wonder about what below the surface has been going on in Germany all this time. I know many contacts in Germany. I know the German business community was very, very keen on building up economic links with Russia. For them, it was very much the hinterland. But it seems that they can't prevail against the political class. And I'm afraid there's very, very wide sentiments, clearly, amongst large sections of the population which continue to hold to these views.
All right. Jeff says that I read that Putin shared with Modi battle plans for Kharkiv to assist evacuation of Indian students. Support for Indian students has been a feature of every statement India has made.
Yeah, I've
Quiet
seen that.
diplomacy works.
I've seen that too. Now, look, it's possible. I mean, I don't know. One of the problems, by the way, is that it's now become almost impossible. I used to, if you remember, one of the things about my programs is that I used to do readouts, used to study Russian readouts, compare them with Western readouts of Putin's conversations. And it's become impossible because the Russian presidential website, the Kremlin's website, is now under such severe DOS attacks that it's become, at least in Britain, completely inaccessible. So I can't read these readouts anymore. I get summaries of them from Interfax and to some extent Sputnik, though I wonder how long Sputnik is going to be available. RT, by the way, is practically unavailable now in Britain in any format. Even the website is now practically inaccessible most of the time. So I'm not sure to what extent, what kind of conversations or discussions between Putin and Modi are taking place. And Indian readouts are much more difficult to interpret. At least I find them so. Chinese readouts are clearer.
Yeah. Let's see. Unchained says, "Hi guys, glad to see you on Odyssey. We are happy to be on Odyssey." And let's see. Toilet Sauce says, "There have been domestic digital payment systems in Russia for years. Fairbank Online, Yandex Money, Kiwi Web Money, VTB. Just from the top of my head, these queues in the metro are not going to last long."
Yeah, I agree with that. I totally agree with that. I mean, I think, again, that there is a lot of misunderstanding about this. I think that, I mean, Alex has lived in Russia. He's a tech person. I'm not a tech person. But I mean, the idea that the Russians can't get on top of these things, that they don't have the skills to do it and the technology to do it, I find fantastic. And by the way, a lot of people are talking about, I was reading an article somewhere, I think, again, it was in the Financial Times, about the way in which a very large proportion of Russian consumer goods depend on Western, on imports. It didn't actually say Western imports, but, things that are made, that you need cotton from abroad and all that kind of thing. Well, to the extent that you have to access that from the West, you don't understand how rapidly consumer goods industries and services can adapt to change. I say that because that used to be part of my work. I used to do legal work for people, especially in the retail and clothing industries at one time. And big heavy industry is difficult to shift, but light industry, consumer goods industry, they sort themselves out within weeks. The adjustment can be incredibly fast.
Yeah, I'll relay a story to you about that. When I was in Moscow, living in Moscow at the time, I forgot which round of sanctions, because another thing that the Western media does not report is the fact that you've had sanctions being leveled on Russia. Literally, it was like every 3 months there was new sanctions. So I forgot which sanction tranche this was. But anyway, they introduced sanctions, and a lot of the sanctions covered a lot of food items. And one of those items, a couple of those items on the sanction list with regard to Greece was feta cheese.
Yeah.
And I believe also Greek yogurt and halloumi, Cypriot halloumi, right? Cheeses, Greek cheeses, which are very specific to the Greek culture and the Greek identity. And I remember I used to have this supermarket for people that know Russia or live in Russia called Azbuka, which is a supermarket which is a little more, it was right around the corner from where I live, but they imported a lot of food. They didn't only have Russian food, but they also had a lot of international food, wines and cheese, different things. And I remember I would go there, I would see the Greek feta from the Greek companies that we know, the Delta and the Fage, and these Greek companies that would deliver these feta cheeses and stuff. And when the sanctions came, they were all gone. And I'm telling you, Alexander, literally within 2 weeks, you had Russian feta, you had Russian halloumi, pretty much. I mean, literally with 2 weeks, or Belarus, because Belarus has really good, dairy and cheese production. I mean, within 2 weeks, it was completely replaced with local, products.
And can I just say also that shifting food production is actually harder than changing consumer good chains. That isn't the thing people always understand very well, because remember that agriculture depends very much on the seasons, on getting the cows, to make the milk, to process it, setting up the processing things. If you're talking about textiles, clothes, furniture, those kind of things, it's unbelievably fast. Can just happen within weeks. There'll be price issues, there'll be disruption issues, but it will certainly change incredibly fast. And you'll find suppliers, Russian and Chinese and Turkish suppliers, stepping in very, very quickly to take up any slack. I think this isn't something people really understand very well, but you're going to see all of this happen over the next few months incredibly quickly, just as you saw it with food.
Yeah, big opportunities for a lot of businesses in Eurasia in general.
Absolutely. The big problem, the most difficult one for the Russians, is this Boeing restriction on spare parts for these large fleets of Boeing aircraft that were bought by Aeroflot. Now, the Russians do have an aircraft industry which is coming forward, but that takes time to get into gear. But I was reading somewhere somebody saying, that all these jets that Aeroflot uses are actually leased from various companies, Ireland, and all the rest. What's going to happen, straightforwardly, is the Russians will seize them. They will force a fire sale. The Irish lessors will have to, they'll be paid money for them, but it'll be a forced sale, and the airlines will just cannibalize the spare parts from aircraft taken out of use. So that will create some disruptions and some
Didn't
problems.
Iran go through that?
That's exactly what they did.
Iran had the same problem, didn't they?
Exactly. They had exactly the same problem, and that's exactly what they did. And the Russians will do the same.
Can you explain that again real quick, and I'll get some more questions? What exactly is the plan for the spare parts with Boeing that Iran did and that Russia's going to do?
Well, what they will do is they will essentially stop the return of these jets to Ireland, to the lessors. They'll confiscate them, force a fire sale, pay the Irish lessor, if it is an Irish lessor, a certain amount of money for them, take some of these aircraft out of production, cannibalize them for spare parts, and use them to keep the rest of the fleets going. Remember, they won't need as many aircraft now
because they won't have as many.
Exactly, the airspace has been restricted. So these things look dramatic, but there are ways round them in the short term. In the medium term, and we're only talking about the medium term now. I mean, the MS-21, narrow body, is already now about to enter production. We're going to start to see Russian aircraft replacing the Western aircraft, and there'll be narrow bodies initially, but wide bodies like the new Ilyushin 96 will be appearing over the horizon. And then there's a Chinese project, a joint project with China coming on stream later on in the 2030s. So what they're doing is they're creating again the basis for a revival of the Russian. They're strengthening the revival of the Russian aerospace industry, but that does take more time to work its way through.
Yeah, there's Amrit says there is no such technical equipment that the West makes that Russia doesn't. Russian firms are going to rightly control their market, and the West can see.
Well, exactly. That's exactly what's going to happen. And I mean, again, bear in mind also, I mean, there are some things which the Russians don't make and they can't make don't make and can't make quickly. They can make them over time. But, Apple products, for example, I mean, it's still uncertain to me whether Apple products are still available for sale or will continue to be available for sale in Russia for very much longer. But let's assume, which is likely, that they're all stopped, we're going to see Russia flooded with Chinese ones. And not all Chinese ones are based on American technologies.
Well,
So we're going to see Chinese smartphones and Chinese laptops and all those things, and that's what's going to replace it. And eventually, and I've no doubt about this, we're going to start seeing Russian laptops and smartphones and all of those things appearing too. It opens a space.
Space is always full. But going on that, I also have a hunch. It's just a hunch that not only are you going to see the Chinese hardware in Russia, where you already have a lot, to be honest. I mean, you have a lot of Chinese phones in Russia, Xiaomi and Elephone and Redmi. I mean, there's a lot of models that many people may not be familiar with in Russia that are very popular. But you're also going to see an opportunity for Huawei's App Store. They might have given Huawei the opportunity to now get a lot of traction for their App Store, because I think it's only a matter of time before the Google App Store and the Apple App Store are gone from the Russian market. But that opens up a huge opportunity for Huawei to get their App Store running in not only in China but in all of Eurasia.
Absolutely, I absolutely, because of course if you win over Russia, you win all of Eurasia. I mean, that's the other thing to say. I mean, Iran is already heavily restricted. Central Asia will follow where the Russians lead. This is, I think, something, and I come back to the start of the program. I mean, we're seeing Eurasia being built, but it's going to be ultimately Greater China. We're going to see the Russian interbank messaging system absorbed in this gigantic Chinese one, and we're going to see the Russian systems, industrial and scientific and all those systems, smartphones and all the rest, they're going to be assimilated into the much bigger Chinese ones. Now, whether that's what the West wants to see, I don't know, but that's the reality.
It's a big strategic error, if you want my opinion. But
it's a disastrous strategic error. It's a disastrous. But what do I always say? Decisions made in anger are repented at leisure.
Yeah. Let's see. Niger says, "Doing a great job, guys. Your analysis is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much for that." Let's see. Flying Boar says, "Colonel McGregor was smeared by TYT for the take on Ukraine crisis." Well,
I know
TYT compared to Colonel Douglas McGregor, Cenk Uygur compared to Douglas McGregor. I think we all understand.
Note, by the way, and I want to say this. I mean, note, by the way, who's doing the smearing and who's. I mean, we don't smear people. We don't go out and say things about people. Colonel McGregor doesn't go out and say things about people. But things are said about Colonel McGregor. Horrible things.
The only people we crap on are the very powerful oligarchs and politicians.
I know. True enough.
But we're punching way up.
I know. But also always look at the way we do it. I mean, we don't throw mud. I mean, we really don't. I mean, look at who does throw mud.
Yeah. And it's shameful that they're going after McGregor, because he gave spot on analysis, and he's just saying the truth as an expert. I don't think Cenk is an expert in this stuff. I think Colonel McGregor is an expert.
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, all these people who suddenly become experts when they know tiddly squat. I mean, this is the other thing that I mean. I come back to this. I mean, I am not a military person. So, I'm not going to go and pronounce, that, I understand the details of the Battle of Mariupol. I mean, this is not what I know about and do. But, I actually do say to myself, who are the experts? Colonel McGregor is a military officer, an ex-military officer. He is an expert. He understands these things. I'm not going to pronounce, about things I don't know about and, say this is the truth. I follow him. I don't certainly follow all these people who, as I say, throw mud at him when they don't know what they're talking about.
And it doesn't take courage for people right now to smear someone as a Putin stooge or anti-vax or Brexit. Or that doesn't take courage. It takes courage to do what McGregor did, to go on Fox News and to give an honest account as to how things are going right now on the ground, on the battlefield. as well as what a possible end game for all of this is. That takes courage. What Cenk Uygur did doesn't take courage at all. At all.
At all. I totally agree.
Yeah. And he couldn't find Donbass. I don't even want to say it. He has no idea what the Donbass is. He has no idea who Yatsenyuk is. He has no idea who any of these people are. He has zero idea. Absolutely. He doesn't know who Givy is. He doesn't know who Motorola is. He doesn't know who Zelensky is. He doesn't know who Poroshenko is. He doesn't know who any of these people are.
No, exactly.
So, they're jumping on this story, and in 2 weeks they'll be on the next story.
Absolutely. Well, that's the other thing. I mean, I ought to say, and this is an important thing to say. I mean, you can only keep hysteria running on for a certain amount of time, and that comes back to this, Buddhist calm with which Lavrov and Ryabkov, who was another Russian senior diplomat, was saying this on Russian TV. He said, this is all going to eventually exhaust itself, and then we'll be able to start some serious conversations. I do believe, I can't see how the hysteria, the emotion, all right, let's all call it hysteria, emotion can get higher than it is now. And when it does subside, and people can't be angry all the time, they become tired eventually, then things will begin to settle, and we'll start to perhaps, hopefully, move forward.
Yeah. So Gato says, Jamu Baraka for president. Thank you for that. William Webster says, would the airline restrict implementation not yet be felt due to the coup? Would the airline restrict implementation not yet to be felt due to the coup?
I understand the point in the sense that, it's actually, and he's absolutely right. I mean, it's still difficult. There are still restrictions in Russia over the coup, and there's still restrictions on flights. So it's not going to be make an immediate difference, because, of course, people weren't traveling in the way that they were traveling previously. But looking beyond this, when all things do start to open up, I don't think these travel restrictions are sustainable, actually. I think this is going to be the first thing to go. And I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see those taken apart in a few months' time. Other things are going to be very difficult. But given that all of European airspace and all of North American airspace is already closed to Russians, if we're talking about aircraft, they don't need that many aircraft. And one mustn't overestimate anyway how many Russians travel to Europe or America. Most Russians have never done so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, if this doesn't get cleared up, the Cyprus tourist industry is going to be destroyed.
Greece, Cyprus.
But Cyprus is 45% Russian tourists. 45%.
Absolutely. And not just there, but if you go to the Alps, Russians have been major visitors in the Alps in the winter seasons, the skiing seasons.
Yeah. Sophia says China is under huge disadvantage in the media war. Chinese media are actually influenced by the West capital. They've so far successfully influenced people's views to this war to a certain extent. Worrying.
I'm not completely clear about this. I mean, bear in mind, China operates an entirely internal. I mean, its media is basically. I mean, China looks inside itself. And I get to say something else. I mean, the Chinese are a bit better, in my experience, at soft power than the Russians are, who could. I mean, the Russians are hopeless at soft power, as we've discussed many times. The Chinese are a bit better at it, and that's partly because they've been able to work with a large part of the Chinese diaspora, which is very receptive to the message from China. And, you find lots of Chinese communities in all sorts of Western countries who are proud of what their country has achieved over the last 30 years, and you can build on that. But we mustn't overestimate the extent to which China has any real skin in the game where soft power is concerned. Even China is comprehensively outmatched in this area by the US. The US is head and shoulders above everybody else. And we mustn't overstate We mustn't assume otherwise. As for China itself, I saw an opinion poll there, and it wasn't an opinion poll exactly. It was a survey of social media comments, and they were overwhelmingly on the Russian side amongst Chinese netizens.
Yeah. Tweak says, I assume everyone knows everything after a semester in the classroom. And Pierce says the hysteria is not going to subside.
Well, not for a long time. But, you know, hysterias do. I mean, I should say this. I have been through these periods before. And they've always been very distressing. I mean, I remember there was you know, when the Soviets marched into Afghanistan, it was pretty much like what we're experiencing now. And then there was the shoot down of, you know, KAL 007, you know, over Sakhalin back in '83. And that was pretty awful. And, you know, going back in time, you see these things, they come and they go. And of course, Russiagate was pretty awful. I do accept this one is particularly bad. And we see these Western leaders who, as I said, one senses that viscerally, this is exactly how they feel. The only one I think who doesn't, by the way, and I say this again, I think he's proved completely ineffectual in the end. I'm not. This is a negative compliment, if you like. I think that Macron personally doesn't share this visceral antipathy to Russians. It's the only thing about him that makes him different from the others, because in all other respects he's the same. And many members of his government are every bit as bad as everyone else.
Yeah. Let's see. Headroom Capital says, what is the chance of Russia trying to annex the Baltic states after the conflict in Ukraine concludes?
None. I mean, this is a thing which people, I think, find very difficult to understand. The Russians aren't interested in the Baltic states. It's something. I mean, they're three little republics. They're not far. I mean, I'm talking about the Russian population. Most Russians would have some difficulty, you know, telling the one from the other, actually. And there are no Russian plans to march into the Baltic states or anything of that kind. This is again an emotional spasm that people have that I think is profoundly wrong. I'm going to say something else about the Baltic states. The people who are putting the position of the Baltic states in jeopardy are the Baltic states. I mean, I don't follow I don't track the news of the Baltic states very much, but from what I've understood, their economies are in serious problems. The sanctions that were imposed on Belarus have been very, very bad for them. And what's happening now is going to be even worse. And in Lithuania's case, they've managed to antagonize China as well over the Taiwan issue, which I can't understand why Lithuania would want to have done that.
Why they did it.
Why they did that. So, as I said, I don't track the Baltic states, but they're small. They are, you know, they're not. They neighbor on Russia. Their logical policy ought to have been, or so it seems to me, to establish at least civil relationship with Russia, even if they don't want to like it. But you know, what they've done again is that they've put themselves in deep economic jeopardy by joining this campaign, in fact, by instigating this campaign, which is going to go against them, or so it seems to me.
Yeah, and you know, we have to be honest, they did play a leading role in the regime change stuff that was happening in Belarus a year ago.
Absolutely.
And they put themselves out there.
They put themselves out there again, and gained what? I asked myself.
Gained what? Yeah. Let's see. Jose Pavon says, I know this is off topic, but what do you recommend for young people to do? Should I leave the West? Everything seems to just getting worse.
No, don't leave the West. Don't give up your home. Don't separate yourself from your people.
Unless you want to.
Unless you want to.
Unless you have a country that interests you.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I can't give, it's not for us to give advice like that. I mean, we can report news and we can comment about it and give our opinions and share our analysis. And we can't give that kind of advice. I mean, it's just not what we're about ultimately.
Yeah, but I mean, if there's a country that you're interested in,
Yeah,
then go explore
we'll
it
go.
and see if it's a
We'll go
place you
explore it.
like. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. As long as it's not Russia, because then you'll be a Russian stooge.
Yeah, indeed. Right.
It's just a joke, YouTube. Just a joke. Tim Gibson says, I haven't heard what you thought about Hillary's talk of trading rebels like we did in Afghanistan.
Well, that turned out so well. Why not do it all over again? Why not take the ladies and gentlemen of the Azov battalion with all their tattoos and their runes left over from the 40s and 30s and give them arms, give them even more arms, and establish safe bases for them all over Europe and attract all the many types of people with those sort of views that we know exist. They're not percentage terms that many of those people, but they do exist, and have them all over Europe and start some kind of an insurgency. And we'll see how well that turns out in Europe for Europeans. I mean, it's a crazy idea. I mean, it's not going to succeed on its own terms because what it will do if it's attempted is it will irrevocably turn the Ukrainian population against the West. Bear in mind, that's what happened in Chechnya when the West supported, or at least supported jihadi insurgents there, which it did. And you see that now Chechen fighters are amongst the most fervid pro-Russian fighters. They're fighting in Ukraine. It turned people in Syria against the West too, and it will have exactly the same effect in Ukraine if it's tried there, and it will be a disaster for us.
Yeah. John, welcome as a new member. Phil, welcome. And the algorithm, welcome to the Duran community. Great to have you here. Toilet Sauce says, what the Russian TV channel did to Gonzalo was despicable, but I can't help but feel that he was very careless streaming in the center of NAZI-controlled Kiev, talking about the Zelensky regime and armed gangs. People were killed in Ukraine for less.
Right. Well, can I just say, I'm not going to criticize Gonzalo. At this moment in time, he needs all the support, and he's been through a terrible time. And what the Russian channel did was utterly and completely wrong. It's one thing to stream things for your own viewers, for your own Telegram channel. But when Russian television in this type of conflict picks things up like that, well, then that elevates it to the highest levels of the propaganda war. And I think that was completely wrong, and put him in a very, very, very difficult position.
Yeah, as we said in our past live streams, they should have at least just reached out to him and asked if they can use his content. It is his content at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
And they just should have asked him, can we use this content for this purpose?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's see, Fiona, thank you for your super chat. John, thank you for your super sticker. And Raphael says, we need to be careful because we may be watching a bunch of guys doing kata karate in a dojo and we think they are fighting, because I saw an article that 3 Russian banks are excluded so that Europe can pay for gas.
Yeah, so true. Can I say though that about the war, I am sure your point actually applies to what's called the war. Now, my understanding from reports I'm getting from the ground, and I'm not referring to Gonzalo here, I want to make that very clear, and from what I'm reading in other places, is that there has been no fighting of any serious sort in Kiev. I mean, there's been no attempt by the Russians to storm the city. So, a lot of the reports we're getting about, the resistance and the battles and the Russians being fought to a standstill have no fundamental reality. And that is logical, because if the Russians want to negotiate with the Ukrainian government, which is they are doing at this moment as we are speaking, there are discussions underway. They need that government to survive. They don't want to go into Kiev and round up all the ministers and put Zelensky in prison, because how do they negotiate with him in that case? So this is, I think, the situation. And some people, by the way, who are talking about, Berlin 1945, need to understand that This is completely different.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the gunfire that's being heard is from prison people being released, from
Oh, I
gangs
know.
taking control of guns. I mean,
Yeah,
just all kinds
apparently.
of craziness probably going on.
Apparently that is absolutely taking the place. And I again saw reports in some parts of the Western media. Again, it might have been the Financial Times. I might be wrong there, but I have seen in the media that there have been serious problems. That there is a progressive breakdown in law and order in Ukrainian cities, and I mean that was a reckless, utterly reckless, and irresponsible thing to do.
Yeah. William Webster says, do you think that the EU, to survive this crisis, that they will try to get a vote for members of EU Council to allow it to cement its power?
Yeah,
In other words,
absolutely.
more power to the center.
Absolutely, that's exactly what they're going to do. After all, as Alex pointed out, quite just the other day, Ursula von der Leyen was talking about EU territory.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they've
She said
taken.
it.
She said it. They've taken restrictions against broadcasters, Russian broadcasters, and media outlets across the EU. That was supposed to be something that domestic regulators did.
Yeah.
Suddenly, it's so. I mean, this has been a colossal power grab to a completely unelected person or group of people.
EU territory, exactly.
Yeah, EU territory.
Rich says the Russian army military of the LPR and DPR have encircled Mariupol yesterday. Russian army has completed from north to south the total blocking of Donbass, central Ukraine enclosing Ukraine army, and in Asia, Ukraine is being liberated.
What you say about this? That Mariupol is surrounded, and that the Ukrainian army in the Donbass is now essentially also surrounded, corresponds with what I've been hearing and reading, and I think it's probably true. I'm sure it's true.
The only thing I will say there, from various reports that I have read, is yes, Mariupol is completely surrounded.
Yeah.
That there is still a small part of that cauldron
Yeah.
in the east, which is open,
Yeah.
but the Azov battalion and the military that is trapped in that cauldron, they can't really retreat, because as they retreat, they're just getting just taken out. Yeah, as they retreat, and anyone that can retreat has to you can't take any artillery or any heavy weaponry.
Yes,
You can't do anything.
yes.
You have to just kind
Yes.
of make a run for it in a
Yes,
way,
yes. Well, exactly.
But that's one of
Yes.
the things that I've read. But
Yes, and that I mean I haven't read that, but it corresponds with what I've been told, which is that when people talk about armies being surrounded, I mean you don't have military units in every single location that in a kind of perimeter. It's not like you create a prison. You make it impossible for units to retreat, because you are able to crisscross and fire on them, and you've probably got drones circling and keeping track of what people are doing and things of that kind. So it's not realistic to think of this as some kind of medieval siege. It doesn't quite work like that in modern warfare. But in effective terms, it seems that they are surrounded.
yeah, Dub Fractal says many Ukrainians are using Romania as a transit route to Italy. Italy is already saying they are overwhelmed.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, we're going to see a lot more of this. Something else, by the way, Alex and I talked about this before, and this goes back to the insurgency thing. Most of the people who are being looked upon as the likely insurgents are not going to stay and fight an insurgency war. They're going to leave. It's not as if Ukraine itself has been a massive success over the last 30 years. So probably a lot of them were thinking of leaving anyway. And now this is another reason for them to do that. Let me stress, I say that without any pleasure at all. It's not what I want to see happen. I don't like to see people leaving their homes. It's simply a factual comment. And given that the EU granted these people visa-free travel rights, I don't see how we could stop them coming.
Yeah, and we have to be realistic. The countries that are going to have the most migrants are going to be Poland,
Yeah,
I imagine Romania, and
yeah, I know.
I don't know Hungary. I don't know what Orban is going to do, but definitely
Well,
Poland and Romania, I imagine, are going to
yeah,
get the
absolutely.
bulk of
Yeah,
those refugees.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Raphael says Bonaparte and Hitler failed. Now Biden thinks he is the one who was going to destroy Russia. I am ashamed of what we were trying to do. This is bad.
I thank you for saying the last, because I too am. I mean, I should say I'm not just ashamed. I am profoundly and deeply upset, actually. And I come back to what I said. Every one of the sanctions that's been imposed, up to and including the sanctions against the central bank, I had thought were possible. I mean, after they took the reserves of the Afghan central bank, I said, well, if they're ready to do that, they're ready to do anything. So I thought that they might not do these things, because I thought there was a chance that sanity would prevail or rationality would prevail. But I always thought there was likely that they would go down the whole road, but that they would be so visceral, that I did not expect. And the point about being ashamed, I feel it myself. I think this is a shameful, disgraceful affair, an evil one ultimately. And I'm afraid I also agree with the other point. I mean, I was listening to Biden yesterday, and I mean, this is the president of the United States in a time of economic and structural crisis and world crisis. This is the man who's leading us. I mean, comparing him with Napoleon, I'm not even going to talk about the other man. I mean, it just makes you want to tear your hair out. I mean, it's just, I mean, we've talked about him being an empty suit, but that was embarrassing.
Yeah. Well, it's a fantastic distraction, though.
Oh, yeah. But it's not helping him. His ratings are still falling. I mean, it's not that.
Maybe they're not concerned about his ratings at the end of the day.
Well, I don't think they are, because obviously, I mean, the plan is to, as we've always said, to shuffle him out of the picture and to bring someone else. And they can't yet agree on who else it is. I mean, but I mean, I don't know whether our viewers saw it. Was when Kamala tried to correct him when he called, I think it was the Ukrainians Iranians or something like that. And she was trying to sort of, I mean, Rick corrected like that by Kamala Harris. Oh, I mean, what's going on?
Yeah. Blind leading the blind. Toilet Sauce says, I'm afraid of the Russian counter sanctions. What would happen to Boeing if Russia said no more titanium for you? We are now using that to jointly build the CR929 airliner with China.
Well, indeed. What would? And maybe it's coming. Maybe that's coming. I mean, as I said, when I come back to what I said, decisions made in anger are repented at leisure. Why wouldn't the Russians now restrict titanium sales? By the way, I've just seen that they blocked a supply of further rocket engines to NASA. I mean, NASA has been relying on Russian rocket engines, and that stopped. Now, of course, NASA can make its own rocket engines. Let's be clear about this. But Boeing needs titanium, and it's more difficult, I think, to replace those kind of supplies, and it has a more immediate effect than, well, it might maybe not a more immediate effect, but it's more difficult, structurally more complicated to do than than the rocket engine thing. And of course, when you do eventually develop alternative supplies, it's going to cost you so much more.
From Freeborn, JHW, remember, you're only taking flack because you're over the target. Thank you very much for that. Rich says, Russian supplies of enriched uranium can stop, and rocket engine has already SORD 180. Keep sanctioning Russia. West is canceling itself from the world.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a lot there. I mean, we these linkages are very, very important. I mean, I was reading, and of course, bear in mind now that it's not just Russia, it's Ukraine too, because of course, talking about wheat supplies aren't moving out of Ukraine either at the moment. Food prices are going to start rising.
Things are going to get bad,
Mm.
really bad. Srinivasan is a new member. Thank you very much for joining. J.K. Wynn says, have you two heard of the West comparing Zelensky to Churchill?
Oh, yeah. I've heard all
I haven't
kinds of.
heard it, but I can imagine it.
I can imagine it. I mean, all kinds of bizarre things. I mean, he's suddenly become, as I said, the great military leader. And
Yeah. They're putting out photos of him from like 2019 or something and saying he's on the. It's all fiction. It's all Hollywood stuff.
Absolutely,
it's just Hollywood
absolutely.
stuff.
Look, yes, if there is a deal done between Ukraine and Russia, which the terms of which they don't like, that could be difficult for them because having built up Zelensky in this way, what do they do then?
They'll find a way. They'll find it.
Yeah, well, they always do. No, I agree with that. Yeah. I agree with that. I ultimately I do agree.
They're saying. let me tell you how bad it is. There two things. One is they're saying that Putin is suffering from some sort of coof thing.
Yeah,
with his mind. I don't know. And I was talking to someone yesterday, Alexander, and I won't give them. Anyway, I was just talking to someone yesterday, and they said that Putin is suffering from two things: a coof disease,
yes,
and old age. And I asked the person the question, well, what do you mean old age? I mean, how old do you think he is? And the person was saying he's 76 years old. And I said, Putin is not 76. I said, yes, he is. And so I just opened up Wikipedia. That was the first link I saw. Then I opened some other websites and I said he was born in 52. So he's not 76. And you know what the person said to me?
Tell me.
No. It's not true. He is 76. That's a lie. You can't, you can't break through.
You can't break through. No.
Yeah. The propaganda works. Are the Russian army just going to occupy East Ukraine to the Dnieper River as a new strategic boundary?
I don't know. As I said, my guess is, and it is a guess. I mean, I'm not saying this with absolute certainty, but my own feel about this is that what they're looking to do is to negotiate some kind of deal with the Ukrainians. Now, and that, I suspect, has been the object of the exercise all along, to separate Zelensky from, let's call them the radicals. That's what the Russians sometimes call them as, and come to some kind of deal with them, which will ensure that Ukraine doesn't join NATO, remains neutral, that these people, these radicals, are disarmed and scattered, and that Ukraine no longer poses any kind of threat to Russia. I think that is the Russian objective. I think also they want to see the Donetsk and Lugansk authorities have complete control over their entire regions. Now, if they don't get that, if the Zelensky government digs in, then of course the calculus starts to change. And we may see that the Russians start moving on to a plan B, and that could very well include expanding the areas of their control and establishing alternative administrations there. I'm going to guess, and this is again a pure guess, that the key is going to be Odessa. Odessa, for people who don't know, is for the Russians an extremely important city. It is a city established, obviously, by Catherine the Great. It was the third greatest city of the Russian Empire. It is an enormously important cultural center. It's an enormously beautiful city. It has a famous criminal underclass, which in Russian folklore is something like, Al Capone's Chicago. There's a huge literature, culture, history around Odessa. And note that the Russians haven't made any move against it up to now. If they do take over Odessa, that will be a sign for me that they've given up any hope of achieving a deal with Zelensky and his government. Because to be straightforward about this, if the Russians take over Odessa, I can't really see them giving it up. It would be too emotional a prize to surrender again.
Not only that, but Odessa is the key in order to create a land bridge to Transnistria.
Absolutely. Well, there is that too. There is absolutely that as well.
Yeah.
I think Odessa, in a way that I think people in the West don't quite realize, is at least as emotionally important for the Russians as Kiev is, for example, perhaps even more so.
Okay, greetings from Mexico, entertaining maximum cynicism here. If Putin indeed has a stake on the worldview advocated by the WEF, the gain of the WEF agenda could potentially come from order out of chaos. Let's prevent this from happening again in the future by having a globalized technocracy monitoring personal communications, thought, etc. Is this at all possible?
I'm afraid it's possible. I mean, let's never assume that these things are not possible. I don't think it's realistic. I think if it's ever established, it won't survive. I'm going to say something else. And, I hope this isn't going to sound too dystopian. I think that globalization as such is. I don't think this is playing out well for globalization and those sort of advocates. But look at how China is organized and how the system works there. And I said that Russia is going to be gradually pulled into the orbit of Greater China. So it's not inconceivable. I'm not saying this is going to happen, that we could end up with two technocratic structures that are politically opposed to each other, but in some ways have much in common. And that would be a pretty dystopian vision too. So let's
two WEFs,
two WDFs. So let's not be ultimately, and that's I think the important thing to say. We have to fight our own battles here. If we don't want to live like that, we have to fight that here in the West. It's a shame people are not talking about the truckers anymore, because that is at least as important in the West a struggle as anything else that's going on elsewhere.
Yeah. And there's a convoy in the United States as well that no one is talking about. And I hear it's picking up steam as well. I mean, I hear there's like a lot of support, but completely there's no oxygen for there's it in the media. Yeah.
Exactly.
Bram, thank you for your super chat. Rich says Greek, Russian, Chinese, Iran, Arabic, Indian nations have been there for 3,000 years. If they ban Russia, the world will support Russia, but not the criminal West.
Well, I think that's to a great extent already the case. I mean, the oldest nation state in the world is China, and it's backing Russia. The oldest continuous existing nation state in the world, I should say. I mean, there have been other nation states which have existed, but have faded out over time. But China has a continuous history going back, political history, as a nation state going back to about 3000 BC. Some people say even earlier. So that's an incredibly old state. The oldest continuous civilization is India. And they're both backing Russia. Israel, sympathetic to Russia. Arab world, sympathetic to Russia. Greeks, obviously, always sympathetic to Russia. So, yes, I think there's a lot of truth in this.
Yeah. J.K. Wynn says the West establishment looks like a joke. Glad Beck question now.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Krasmir. Thank you for becoming a member. Commander Crossfire says growing hostility towards Slavic people as a whole. Internment camps soon to come? Question mark. Russians abroad will have some proper LV of hate towards their own country and culture to avoid suspicion and detainment.
I already know of things like that happening, that Russians have, in order to avoid being put in compromising personal positions in Britain, have been forced to say things or feel forced to say things that they don't really mean. And I'm afraid we're going to see an awful lot more of that. Internment camps, well, I hope not. But anything is possible now.
Alan says it is time to create an orthodox union of countries as defense, as it is always the West singles out these countries and picks on them one at a time.
Yeah. There is enormous hostility to the Orthodox Church in much of the West. There's an awful lot of hostility to Christianity in much of the West. And I have to say, that's another thing that has stunned me. I mean, the extent of de-Christianization, I'll use a measured word, hostility to Christianity and hostility to the Orthodox Church in particular. I find it extraordinary.
Rich says Japan is going to get isolated in Asia because no big nations in Asia support the Western sanctions on Russia, but have empathy for Russia. They will come
Indeed.
around.
Indeed so. And can I just say something else? Because I have some family connections to South Korea, not very close ones, but, it's a country I visited. And apparently the South Koreans have been strong-armed into imposing sanctions, but they've already said to the US they want to limit the reach of what those sanctions will be. They want to maintain economic contacts, whereas Japan is taking a harder line.
Ms. Pardal, thank you for the super sticker. The Ancient says Lavrov said he believes some foreign leaders were preparing for war against Moscow and they will fight till the end. He did say that.
I heard that too. I heard that too. Yep.
Yeah. The 301 says sanctions were so thorough. Are they premeditated?
Yes, of course. I mean, can I just say all of these ideas, the SWIFT disconnection, the sanctions against the central bank, all of these things have been floating around for a very, very long time. What's happened is somebody's gone through the menu, put them all together and issued them all at once in a kind of big bang attempt. And they were advised against doing it by the Fed. They were advised against doing it by the Wall Street banks, by the European banks, and they went ahead and did it anyway. I gather even Christine Lagarde wasn't too keen on doing it, but, well, there we are.
Lynn, thank you for that super sticker. And Leon says, fill those mugs, gentlemen. Thanks for all you do. Thank you very much, Leon, for that. And Freedom Autopsy Report says, what do you think about the Convention of States and the possibility of bringing back the Bill of Attainder?
Well, I hope we don't go there. Bills of Attainder, for those who don't know, this is a British legal device, were ways that the British government, rather I should say not the British government, the English government in the early modern era, the Tudors and Stuarts used to basically declare people traitors. And that was, in Queen Elizabeth I's and Henry VIII's day. I hope we don't go to those places. But, well, I have to say, if we did, there would be certain people who would applaud it happening. I mean, I find it very difficult to simply go onto Twitter anymore. I read what people like Greenwald and Taibbi and all those people who do write about it, but I mean, it just makes my stomach turn. It already started doing that during Russiagate.
Yeah. Rockabilly, thank you for your 3 super chats. Thank you very much for that. Amrit says, crap American European weapons are going to get destroyed by Russian high-grade armor and weapon systems. Send them Europe and U.S. Humiliation for West.
Do you know something? I want to stress this. This isn't something I can remotely prove or corroborate or check out. But I've heard garbled reports that the Javelin isn't working too well, that there are problems with the battery, and that it doesn't actually it doesn't achieve the kind of knockout blow on Russian tanks that it was billed as doing.
Well, you get the reverse report from Western.
I know.
The Russian weapons are not working well.
I know. All of these things are being said. Certainly, I have to say that I'm going to make an observation here. I mean, there's very, very few real reports of actual visible reports of real fighting. I mean, we're not talking about war correspondents going into the front lines as they used to do in Vietnam and other places, and reporting and showing us actual battles going on. I mean, I'm just old enough, gives you people some idea of how old I am, to remember seeing TV shots. I was in Greece still during the Tet Offensive, and I can remember, there were the American journalists in places like Hue, and they were right there on the front line, and you could bullets flying past them. It was quite astonishing. You don't see anything like that in Ukraine. You haven't seen anything like that for a very long time, in fact.
Heyman says the Soviet leadership were willing to put their people through a lot under accepting failure. I don't expect any different from the Ivy League Karens.
Yeah, true enough.
Rich says there is no such technical equipment that the West makes that Russia doesn't. Russian firms are going to rightly control the market, and the West can see.
Well, indeed, yes. I mean, I think what we're going to get is divisions. I think we're going to see Western aircraft, for example, in Western airlines, and Russian and Chinese aircraft in Russian and Chinese airlines, much as it was during the Cold War, by the way. We're entering the great bifurcation. Sorry. Good. I can tell.
Yeah.
We're entering the great bifurcation. Things are dividing.
Yeah, definitely. Where are we here? William says, on the plane, spare parts could be made in Russia, give their skills and parts could be purchased through China.
Well, right. The latter might be difficult, and the Chinese might be unwilling to do that because they obviously don't want to get themselves into a difficult position. Though, of course, I mean, for Boeing to sacrifice the Chinese market would be catastrophic. But I don't think they need to do that because, as I said, I think what they would simply do is what the Iranians have done, which is cannibalize spare parts. That will take you quite a long way until you get your own aircraft up and running, and they will.
Yeah. Rich says American designed chips, but the fabrication takes place on Taiwan Island of China and are inserted into Redmi, Xiaomi, Oppo, etc. Russia, China both design high-end processors. Massacre of American firms coming.
Yeah. Again, we've discussed processors a lot in these programs. I think that's right, and I think that's going to shape out quite clearly over the next couple of years.
Yeah. Kurt says, if you hear Russia invaded without reason, 1, 400% increased shelling of Russians. 2, no security guarantees. 3, Zelensky wants nukes. Still no reason.
Oh, no.
Good points, Kurt.
Very good points. Yeah.
Summed it up. Rich says, American dominance hasn't brought much good. Their fall is at least going to bring an alternative. Russia-China alliance is better for the world.
Well, can I just say on the first point, I actually don't agree. I'm going to say straight away, I remember the United States as it was, and I think it brought enormous good to the world. I can remember, for example, the Greece that I was born into in the 1960s, and what the kind of a place it was. And I think that the role of the United States in making Greek life better was in those days very positive. And I think the same is true of Europe. I think that if you look at the old Europe that existed before the United States began to involve itself in it, yeah, it has many great things. It produces great arts and literature and science, but the American contribution was a great one. Unfortunately, all that's in the past, and I think that America doesn't produce much that is good anymore. And I, as somebody who is a person who has a great love of the United States, look, I've got an American flag there. That fills me with sorrow.
All right. Raphael says, every time a leader tried to destroy Russia, they also finished badly. Japan, France, Germany. After Ivan, China was never the same. Pay attention to this. It will not end well for them.
I agree. Yes.
Anthony, keep it up. Super sticker. Thank you very much. T-Coach says, Putin has his Taekwondo black belt taken away. Question mark.
Oh, no,
Does he have a Taekwondo or judo black belt?
Yeah, absolutely. It was taken away from him. I know. Yeah. I don't think. And, let's not say, I mean, it's not going to make him change his decisions, but it's going to upset him. I mean, it's something.
It's meaningless. Yeah, exactly.
It's a meaningless thing.
It's meaningless. It's just
a meaningless thing.
Dumb stuff. It's virtue signaling. Can we just call it what it is? It's virtue signaling, because these are people and corporations and Twitter users and TikTok users. They have no.
I know.
They don't know anything about what's going on. That's the truth. They know a lot of other things, sure. TikTok kids, they know how to dance and do short videos, but they don't know anything about what's going on in Ukraine.
That's entirely true. And it's gesture politics are the most meaningless.
Yeah, it's meaningless. Exactly.
Meaningless.
It's better
But
not
it's
say anything because it's
I know,
meaningless.
I
Yeah.
know, I know. I mean, it's also, I mean, at a personal level, I'm sure it's hurtful. I mean, sure, it's something he certainly took pride in. And, you know, is that going to make him more favorably disposed to the West? Is that going to make him more willing to sit down, as eventually one would like him to do, and negotiate with Western leaders?
William Webster says, apologies for my bad grammar. Thank you very much for that super chat, William Webster. Flying Boar says, Christia Freeland tweeted and then deleted the picture holding Azov Battalion blood and soil flag.
I know, yeah. She should know what it means better than almost anyone else.
Yep.
By the way, on the subject of Christa Freeland, I hadn't realized that she was the same Freeland that I used to read in the Financial Times back in the 90s. I hadn't appreciated that it's the same person. Yeah.
Yes, she is.
Yes.
She's deeply embedded.
Yeah.
In the system.
Yeah.
Deeply embedded in the system.
Yeah.
Flying Boar says Canada ban on RT channel.
Yeah, it's, as I said, unobtainable now. I mean, you can't get it in Britain. It's not available on cable, and it's not. You can't get it via YouTube, and the Google search won't take you there, and the website you can still just about find it if you go to old links, but it's under massive, constant DOS attacks now.
Yeah. Which is why I've been saying for a long, long time, RT should have leveraged Yandex. They should have leveraged Yandex and many years ago built up their own platforms.
Yeah.
And not deal with opening up channels, TV channels and stuff like that.
Exactly. Well, I know
they had the money, they had the resources, and they have Yandex right down the street.
Alex, I remember you telling me this. How long ago? 6 years ago?
Yeah. And Yandex makes good technology. I mean, they're very good at what they do.
I know. I remember you telling me this 6 years ago, and many times since.
Yeah, they wouldn't have this problem now.
No.
But the one thing about RT that people don't know is that RT is very liberal. Yes. I mean, the people that work there, the culture is very liberal. I mean, they want to be part of, not everybody there, but a good chunk of the people in RT. They want to be part of that New York media, LA media crowd. I mean,
absolutely,
they like that stuff.
Can I just confirm that? And just to give an example, I once got an invitation to attend an RT event in London. Margherita Simonian, who was the chief executive of RT, was there. And the BBC, she'd invited all these people from the BBC there, and they all turned up. And she was so thrilled that the BBC people were there. And she gave this speech about how, in her long ago in the Soviet Union, how she used to listen with joy and to BBC broadcasts to the Soviet Union as it then was, and how this meant, what it meant for her to have the BBC there. And I remember thinking to myself, you are completely wrong about these people. They don't have any time for you at all. You may speak English beautifully, you may talk the talk, but they will never accept you.
Yeah, it's something that many people don't talk about, but it is it's there. There's a big liberal undertone there in that channel. Anyway, I Met More says there was a joke in Russia in the 90s. An optimist learns English, a pessimist learns Chinese, and a realist learns how to use an AK-47. Seems it's time to learn Chinese and make me optimistic. Thank you very much for that.
That was the 90s. As I said, the world is very different today.
Yeah. L. Boone says, so true what you said about with us or be destroyed. Spoke with some woke people and they say assassinating Putin is okay. It's crazy.
Oh, yeah.
It's crazy. Raphael says, we need to be careful because we may be watching a bunch of guys doing, I read that one. Raphael doing karate in a dojo. That one I read. Thank you, Raphael, for that. Orima, thank you for your super sticker. Veso, thank you for your super sticker. Chris, this is all pretext for further EU integration. Exactly.
Well, indeed,
Exactly
yeah,
right,
absolutely, yeah, absolutely right, yeah.
Yep. Zariel says, can Gonzalo take any legal measures against the Perve Canal?
I'm not going to give advice on this. They'd have to be done in Russia, and that might not be easy.
It's not easy. David says, what do you think of U.S. threats to sanction India?
Lunacy, madness. I mean, the United States has been trying to win over India and bring it into the Quad, and now they're talking about sanctioning India. I mean, again, it tells me that they need to get a grip. I mean, their emotions are running out of control.
And the Indians are not going to, just the fact that this got out, just the fact that this got out is not going to play well with India at all.
At all.
And they are some of the best diplomats in the world.
In the world, yeah.
Yeah. Kurt Fram says, did you hear Lavrov say that it's time for the U.S. nukes in Europe to be sent home? Source RT News.
Yes, it is. It's true. Glad you can source RT News. I'm having great difficulty doing so. But yeah, no, Lavrov did say that. Mind you, that's not entirely new Russian position. So I'm not surprised about it.
Kurt says, no, I read that. I'm starting to lose where I am here in the list. Raphael says some newspaper editorial boards in the U.S. Start calling the whole thing the great blunder. Keep your eyes on this development. They are always first.
Yeah.
Just because they've won the media war, Alexander, things could change if they. You know what it is? Real quick, it's like if they go too far in their punishment. It's like with the vaxes, right?
Yeah.
At first, you could say if you don't get vaxxed, then okay, you need a test in order to go to the cafe. And then they made it like, well, you can't go into the cafe. And then they said, well, you need a test to go to the supermarket. And they say you can't go to the supermarket. Then they said you can't go into bars and clubs, and now you can't travel. And after a while, you have even people who have gotten the jab saying, are we taking it a little too far against these people? The media may run the risk and all these sanctions of being like, maybe we're taking it just a little too far.
I know. Absolutely. I agree. I completely agree. And I think that eventually there will be a pendulum swing. But I'm going to say something. Pendulum swing, yes. I think that, the hysteria will eventually die down. But what this has exposed for me is that below the surface, there is this, as I said, this visceral feeling. I'm avoiding use of certain words, which I think are appropriate in this case, but I'm avoiding them because we're also on YouTube, which I'm afraid I don't think is going to go away. And that has been a real shock for me. I mean, this isn't just a calculated thing. I mean, there is clearly a very substantial section, not just of the elite, but of the Western populations, at least in some countries, that absolutely hate Russia.
Well, can we be honest? No. I mean, it is, if there's one culture, one people that can be mocked, even in the woke America of today, it's Russians.
Absolutely, yes.
Even in the woke America, it's Russians that are mocked.
It's Russians. Absolutely.
And I have no idea why, because I'll say it again. Yeah. And I'm Greek, everybody. I'm not Russian, but I have lived in Russia and I know the culture and I love the culture and the people. And it doesn't make me a Russian stooge if I say that.
No.
It is one of the greatest, most complex histories and cultures I've ever had the fortune of trying to understand. I mean, you can probably speak for 3 hours about the literature.
Absolutely, I could do easily, and the music and the painting and the architecture, by the way, which is going to be pretty extraordinary. All of these things. And it is beyond bizarre. I mean, modern music, as we understand it, the two cultures that have contributed most to it are the American and the Russian. Now, the Russian influence is not easily understood, but it is profound.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about visual art, if you're talking about literature, if you're talking about psychological literature,
film. I don't know how you cancel that.
Yeah, film.
Yeah. Piers Taylor says, in Germany, Olaf Scholz declared 100 billion euros of increased military spending in
Yeah.
response to Ukraine crisis to expand Germany's military power.
Yes, I know exactly. Which is, I mean, I don't know how well. I don't think that will play well in Germany at all. By the way, but I would add, but consider this. This is a green. The Greens were, when I remember them, when they started in the 1970s, the anti-militarists, and now they're part of a government that has gone full out military.
Freedom Autopsy Report says, did Russia seize the Antonov 225 as a war trophy for Putin?
I don't know. I'd heard that it was destroyed. I don't, and you know, but I don't think they've seized it. And can I just say something else? What would they do with it? I mean, I certainly not as a war trophy, but what would they realistically do with it? They have their own program, by the way, to build an even bigger aircraft, the Ilyushin 106, apparently, which is going to be bigger. Why would they want to seize the Antonov 225, which is, by the way, a Soviet era aircraft?
From One Manga, why are Germany and Japan hardline? Just look at the United Nations Charter, enemy states clauses. Then anyone understands why and how the people of the two major Axis powers are being exterminated. What are we dealing with here is a hot phase of World War II, not World War III, but have no independence.
I can't speak for Japan. What I will say is this. In Germany, the political class is very deeply penetrated by Atlanticism. I mean, that has been a very, very deep-seated problem. It was basically formed in an Atlanticist mode after the Second World War. So you do get some German leaders who've pushed back against this. But if you look at who they were, people like Brandt and Schmidt and Kohl, they're all people who had memories of the world before the Second World War and also had memories of the Second World War. The political leaders of today in Germany know nothing other than Atlanticism.
From Dubrafractal, after Russia, who can they cancel?
Good question.
Everybody.
Yeah. If they, everybody. I mean, isn't that where we're heading?
Yeah. Peter says, I find anti-government protests in Russia to be deeply disturbing. It seems many in the motherland have been folded into the neoliberal paradigm. Any thoughts?
I don't think there have been many anti-government protests in Russia, not on any major scale. Again, you mustn't make the mistake of looking at what the media is reporting about this.
Jay Galt says, Alexander, you say not to abandon the West, but the future here is being Rothschild tax cattle and scientific experiment for Bill Gates.
Yes. Well, I understand a lot of people say that, but I am a person who is of the West. And, we're Greeks. I agree. I'm a Greek. I feel that so much of the West owes so much to the Greeks. I mean, American democracy. Democracy is a Greek word. It's not easy for me just to sort of write all that off. I hope that I won't have to, but with every year that passes, a little of that hope goes away.
Harry says, the reporting of Africans being detained at the Ukraine border and the funding of the Azov battalion, is this the unraveling of the Western media spin?
No, because they're not reporting it properly. It's not very, I mean, if you want to know about this in the media in Britain, it's not reported at all. I'll tell you what would have to happen. And please God, this doesn't happen. But if some of these people in Ukraine turn on Western journalists, which has happened in conflicts, but I hope it doesn't happen because I don't want anything like that to happen to everybody. That would cut through.
All right. Jeff, thank you for the super sticker. Francis, thank you for that super chat. Valies, thank you for the super chat. Thank you to all our moderators, Valies, Ellen Watson, Zariel, Reckless Abandon, GEC, Spartan, Warrior, Queen, Cosmic Rain. I think I saw a lot of moderators in this stream. Thank you very much, guys. Rita, thank you for the super chat. Thanks so much for the only real news here in Canada. Great to see you live. Thank you very much for that. And where am I here? Lord Pepsi says, imagine El Salvador gets banned from SWIFT, then starts using alternative money and increased trade with China as a proxy to trade with Russia.
Could very well happen. I mean, these sanctions are the last expression of a technological world that is ending. I mean, SWIFT is a creation of the early internet.
David, thank you for that super sticker. Life of Brian says Russia got the oligarchs under control. That's why they hate Putin. Everyone else is paid to parrot.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Kurt says, I think that there is a chance that the destruction of the EU industrial base will force Europe to end the sanctions sooner than we might think.
I would like to think so. The trouble is, we're not dealing with rational people, and one can't be certain of this.
Yeah. Lurias, thank you for that super sticker. Zawiel says, check out Freeland's grandfather. Research it.
Oh, I have indeed. I already have done. As I said, I've known about him for a long time. The fact that she's also the Krista Freeland, whose reports from Moscow I used to read in the 90s, that I did not realize.
Yeah. Curtis Thompson says, your thoughts about the USA mirror my own. I grew up with stories about my country and felt the pride in being part of it. But year after year, that wanes. Now there's only hypocrisy and corruption.
I used to love the United States. I mean, I still do. I mean, I still have in my own mind the real United States, which I believe. But I was brought up, on the Untouchables, the Star Trek, American music, American art, which is incredible, and of course, in a country like Greece, what the Constitution represented, democracy, all of those things. It's, for me, deeply depressing, and watching the State of the Union address reinforced that depression even more.
Yeah. Sidebook VR says, here in South Korea, we only hear how terrible and laughable the Russian army performance is. We get no filter from propaganda.
I know that. I know. Here I will say this again. You will find more intelligent commentary about this in the US, in the US media, than you will anywhere else. And believe it or not, I was reading the New York Times last night. I'm dared to go to the New York Times for some time, and I found that the New York Times, of all places, was still getting more, shall we say, less fantastical reports than you would find in the Financial Times in London.
Toilet Sauce says, Bonanza Media has sued Russian TV channel for misappropriating their content in Russia and won. Might be worth looking into.
Might be, but that
not in these times.
Not in these times, exactly.
Yeah, in these times, it's hard. I mean, you can't even fly there. So, I mean, yeah. Lord Pepsi says, so ironic that the West is, thank you, Toilet Sauce, for that, by the way. So ironic that the West is punishing Russian people more than Putin could ever do himself in an effort to marginalize him. Good job, Duran.
Thank you. A true point. And of course, the Russian people know this. One of the things about sanctions is that it has always consolidated the societies that are targeted. Why do they think Russia is different?
Sidebook VR says, because of the 90s and 2000s, South Koreans view Russians as inferior white people who live in S-hole backwater.
Everybody thinks this. It's, again, a shock to me, the extent to which people think this.
Yeah, and it's not true. Travel to Moscow. I know it's a big city, but travel there, and it's a very, very nice place.
Yes.
And now we're gonna get people in the chat saying, well, why don't you move there and do that? I've lived there, everybody. So. and I would live there again, happily.
Yeah, and
it's a nice city. Case, and I'm not saying that because I'm a Russian, dude. It's a nice city. As is Krakow, as is Bucharest. Nice cities.
Absolutely. I mean, can I just say something? I always hate that question. I mean, because I like Russia, which I do, it doesn't mean I don't love my own country and my home. And don't choose to live in my own home. I mean, people who talk in that kind of way, you come across imbeciles who say this all the time, really, really annoy me, actually.
Yeah, it's really starting to annoy me too as well. You get that, why don't you go live there? I'm like, I've lived there and I would live there again. And I say it again. I've been to a lot of cities all over Europe, and there are a lot of nice places. There's some cities
Yes,
that
yes,
aren't to my
yes,
liking,
yes,
but Moscow and St. Petersburg are very, very nice cities.
absolutely.
As
Yes,
is Belgrade, as is Krakow, as is Bucharest, as is a lot of cities that I've been to that I'm
yes,
like, I could live here
yeah,
easily. Uh,
absolutely.
yeah. Let's see here. Imre says, "Do you get enough sleep?"
Not at the moment. But then, having said that, this isn't entirely a new thing for me. Uh, um, Once upon a time, when I used to work on the margins of the financial world, I was never in finance myself, but I did a lot of legal work there. I could go on for months without much sleep. Didn't do me. It wasn't something I particularly liked, but there we are.
Yeah.
This isn't like that.
John, thank you for your super chat, John. Thank you very much. JK says, some people can't just take the win; they keep on pushing and fail.
I agree with that. That's so true. That is profoundly true.
Biden White House should take the win instead
Yes,
of keeping on pushing. They have won a
I
lot.
I
That
agree.
that is true.
I agree. But when do people ever know when to stop? That's always the
Yeah.
trouble.
Let's see. I think that's everything. No, wait, I got one or two more questions. Leafybug says it is incredible to me
Yes,
how many normally insightful scholars and analysts are basing
yes,
their commentary on this presumption that Putin seeks to recreate the Soviet Union. It's
yes,
amazing what nonsense can be built upon such a glib and wholly unsatisfactory cliche. It's
yes,
like some grand restaurant critic eating a stick of cotton candy and then expounding upon what a nourishing gourmet meal they just enjoyed.
absolutely. Absolutely correct. Totally right.
Very, very well
Completely,
said.
very well said. Very
H.
well
Rock
said.
says the Duran are going to grow quickly. Enjoy being able to catch their attention for now. Thank you very
Yes,
much for that. And something tells me the Western politicians look to China with awe of their control
yes,
over the population. Do you
yes.
think the politicians are bringing us closer to the Great Reset to achieve total control, solidify their powers in Europe and America?
Well, I think we've discussed this already. Actually, I think to up to a certain point, yes. I still maintain that it's a utopian project which won't succeed.
Hmm. If American history is a predictor, then pretty soon a Russian torpedo will strike a U.S. ship.
Yes,
False
yes,
flag. You mean, yeah.
yes, yes.
Let's see. I think that's the Marshall Plan led to the miracle of post-war European recovery from Allied.
Absolutely, and of course this happened before I was born, but it was in my childhood. It was still much discussed and talked about. It was still something that people remembered, and that did create an image of the United States. In those days, the United States helped countries.
All right,
Now,
let's wrap. Yeah.
now it destroys them. Though
All
I
right.
don't think it's the United States that does that.
All right, let's wrap it up with the last questions in super chats. Heyman says, "Are the military tactics inspired by Mongol ideas?" Ideas.
I hope not. I don't know much about Mongol ideals, but from what I understand, they were pretty ruthless.
Kurt says, "Alexander, I am already getting reports from big corporations that they do not know how they can continue production. Results in massive unemployment." Thoughts?
Well, I'm going to tell you straight away. I'm getting similar reports, but of course we have to wait and see because industrial people do have ways of finding ways round. But I'm going to say something. The Russians have been operating. This is about big industry. The Russians have been finding ways to carry out import up substitution for a long, long time. They can keep most of their important factories running because they've tended to work around problems with machine tools, with spares, with all those sort of things. In the West, we haven't. We have no such plans. Adjustments here could be very difficult. Against that, never underestimate how resourceful managers, industrial managers are. But in big industry, it's always more difficult.
Bonmont says, "How different would daily life even be for most Ukrainians if Russians were to go to an extreme and annex Ukraine? Thank you for your work."
Well, I don't know. I mean, that is a possibility that we just can't evaluate. I'm going to repeat again points which I have made many times. I think that there are massive synergies between Ukraine and Russia. If things were to go in that kind of direction, I suspect those synergies would eventually and very quickly lock into place. And in terms of Ukraine, it might even result in an economic boom. The only time since the end of the Cold War when Ukraine has experienced any significant economic expansion was in the period in the early 2000s, the early to mid 2000s, when it was in a free trade zone with Russia.
Okay, Spectre says, thanks for all the great analysis, especially with all the talking heads screaming war porn. China is the big winner here.
Yeah.
True. Harry Smith says, Nebenzaya gave a press conference a few hours ago and said the U.S. has violated its oath as host nation and asked Russian mission to United Nations to leave U.S. soil by March 7th. Is this possible? And just a follow-up on that exact question, which is Zelensky wants the EU to strip Russia of their permanent seat on the Security Council. A lot of talk about that. Is this possible?
I don't think it is possible. It would require a complete rewrite of the United Nations Charter. And my understanding is, and I sought advice about this, that in order to redo the UN Charter, every single country that had signed up to it would have to agree. And that, of course, would include Russia itself. So I don't think it is actually possible.
Russian tourists make me feel poor, says Duperfectile. And Quick Mansam says, thanks for the live stream. Thank you. And we will end it there. We got to all the questions, all the comments. Thank you, locals. Thank you, Rumble. Thank you, Odyssey. Thank you, YouTube. Thank you, everyone in the chat. Thank you very, very much for all your comments and all your insight. Any final words, Alexander? Final thoughts as we wrap it up for today?
I was just at the very end of this program. There was a bubble came up, and I looked at it. It was from the Financial Times, and it was all about economics and about Russia running a siege economy. And it was saying that what it basically says is that the maximum effect of the sanctions, all of the sanctions that have been imposed, will dissipate after 6 months. So we're doing all this damage to ourselves, and we're not going to knock out this economy. That article makes it clear that's not happening. And after 6 months, the adjustments will start to kick in, and the economy will start to grow again. So if that's true, that's the Financial Times that's saying all of this. What is the point of it all? I mean, I really don't understand. I mean, it's again, going back to the title of this live stream. It's emotion versus calm. It's running hysterically and keeping a level head. It's decisions being made in anger, which are going to be repented at leisure. And the person who's just said just a moment ago that China is the big winner is absolutely right.
Yeah, but what about the EU and the US and the Western economies? Are we going to be okay after 6 months?
Well, I think the US will find a way through, because it's a big economy. It's got lots of resources. It's got, it will get through somehow. The EU, I've said this already, not just the EU. Let's talk about Europe. Europe is now in irrevocable decline.
Are you including the UK, by the way?
I'm including the UK. I am absolutely including the UK. We are going to go down. We're going to lose competitiveness. We've cut ourselves off from our hinterland, which is what Russia is. And we are going to become a marginal force in world economic affairs. It'll take some time for this to become visible, but in 10 years' time, it will be obvious.
10 years' time.
Yeah, it'll be obvious. I mean, it'll
be obvious.
Start to become clear even before. But in a decade, we will be living in an economic and cultural backwater. That's something that Europeans have no experience of.
All right, everybody, check us out, theduran.locals.com. Alexander's video will be going up later on today. You're putting up a video later on today, correct?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
indeed, absolutely.
Have you picked out the topic?
No, we'll see what it is.
Okay, check out Alexander's video that will go up later on today. I have a couple of videos going up really, really soon. I discussed Greece as well a little bit, Alexander, because I got some inside sources that are saying a lot of the pressure was put on Greece because of their debt to send the weapons, which when you owe people money, you're easily pressured.
Well, absolutely right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, everybody. Thank you to our moderators, Spartan Warrior, Queen, Valies, Zariel, Alan, Reckless Abandon, GEC, Cosmic Rain, and all of you guys moderating. I think I got everybody. Thank you very, very much. Take care, everybody. Have a good day, and we will see you all tomorrow.